what we want to do is we want to sort of introduce this context. Again, like I said, I apply this sort of like perspective even when we're dealing with like Spanx, if that makes sense. So I understand like I'm going to try to move away from that for now, just so that like I really want parents to feel empowered in terms of like you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You have a lot of options. We don't necessarily have to only have one size of screwdriver, one type of hammer, one type of drill. There's so many options. And coming from what we've just spent the last, few sessions talking about and dealing with, where we're talking about our heart condition, our value system that's sort of driving the parental interactions, when that place is in the right zone, then you might grab the wrong tool at times. You know what I'm saying? You might have, there may have been a better way of doing choices, a better set of consequences. But if your heart is in the right place and your value system is directing you in the right direction, what's cool about it is like if you want to introduce like sort of a new system of consequences and implementing that, if your foundation is in the right place and your value system is pointing you in the right direction, you can kind of mess this up a little bit and it still be okay. So it's actually part of the reason why we probably spend a little less time on this portion, even though we could probably spend an entire weekend only on what we're going to talk about right now. Very easily we could. Specifically because I feel like this other portion that we spent time going over is what's going to anchor and sort of give this hope and direction. So like when we first started doing it, we would be I remember us having conversations where it's like, I don't know how to give choices in this place. Like, what am I supposed to do? Did I do the wrong thing? Like you start panicking, like you use the wrong tool, and so now you're going to screw up this interaction or this problem or this situation. And when you have the foundation in the right place and you're going in the right direction, you can kind of make mistakes along the way, and it's not as big of a deal, And so you get so many opportunities, so you'll get lots of times practicing and using the wrong tool, and then figuring out there might be a better tool this time around, Okay, so these tools, right? We're going to talk about parenting with choices. It's a tool set. They can be done in a sarcastic, manipulative, or vindictive way, which is a bummer. It is important that we keep ourselves in control. We keep in control of ourselves. You disengage from the emotional outburst that we may be tempted to use. So the very first thing that you need to understand is when you step into this parenting realm, whether you're going to do choices or whether you're going to do something else, you need to learn how to stay in control of yourself. Okay, you need to learn how to stay in control of your emotions in that zone. The reason why is that when you step in with into the emotional battle, you've sort of left the realm and your capacity to be a coach in the midst of their problem, and now you're in this other battle. And it triggers things psychologically, which we're going to get into. So you want to remember to use genuine empathy. Empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy is this understanding of I remember being in these tough situations. I have compassion for you because of where you're at. I have understanding. There's you guys understand the difference of that, where I feel bummed that you feel bad. That's sympathy. I feel bad for you, versus I remember when I was bullied in school. That's tough. It's a really, really tough place to be. I remember when I lied to my parents and they found out. Oof, I know exactly where you're at right now. You just got found out that you've been lying to me for the last 3 weeks or a year. We were joking about candy wrappers, and we had this one really prosperous Halloween. You know what I'm saying? Where we had 2.5 bags, pillowcases full of candy. We for whatever reason, we happened to just hit houses that were sort of just dumping stuff. They didn't want to have candy left in their house. And we're like, okay, and we come home and it was crazy. So we had candy in our house for, it's 6 or 7 months. It was a long time. It was midsummer before it was all the way gone through. But that several months after that, we were going through the kids' bedroom and rearranging it, and so we had pulled the bunk beds away from the wall. Oh, yeah. We found a place that neither me or my wife had ever visited, and that was the wrapper stash. That was there, and it's it was a bummer. But the thing is like the panic and the anxiety and fear that they were experiencing by being found out in this thing that they'd been hiding for so long. It's like you could just step in and be upset and frustrated and all that stuff. But there's this element of like, I remember that feeling. I remember being found out when I messed up. I remember being exposed when I was trying to hide something that I didn't want exposed. And I remember what I needed. What I needed was a hug. What I needed was love in the midst of my pain and reassurance that our relationship wasn't on the chopping block because I just severely disappointed you. And you know what I'm saying? Like there was like that is what empathy comes in from, where you're like, yeah, like I'm upset, but come here. Like this sucks. Like we I love you through this. So, and that's where like the second one, speak with love. Like you actually want to learn how to communicate with love, in how you're treating them, how you're communicating, how you're engaged in this conversation. Remain in control of yourself even when your child is out of control. They will look to control you through your emotions and emotional responses. This kind of gets into some of the nitty-gritty that actually will happen, where kids, if they can learn, if they see how they can actually get your emotions going, they will learn how to do it. And I sometimes what's funny about it is sometimes it's not in a vindictive sort of like purposeful way. Sometimes it almost feels sort of like intuitive, almost like a subconscious thing. There are kids, though, that do it on purpose. They know they're going to rile you and they're going to go there. And so the more that you can learn to just keep your emotions in control, like go to your room by yourself and scream and freak out with your spouse, and then go have a conversation calmly, or like deal with your child calmly in a way where, like, what the beauty of it is when they hit chaos, you get to be the peace in the midst of their storm. You know, their life is in chaos, their life is in pain, their life is in all this stuff, and you get to be in peace in that zone. You get to be the one that's like, even if you don't feel like it inside, even if inside you're like, oh God, what just happened? Like, oh, you know, like, we had this doozy. I can't go into the details about it, but this was a couple years ago, and one of our kids, we kind of found out some stuff that was going on, and they weren't being completely honest with it because they were sort of like in a state of panic, you know, and like we never have used the whole like, do you have something to tell me sort of like tool. It just feels like manipulative and sort of like I'm trying to find you out. Like, let's test if you can be honest with me. It's like, if I know what's going on, I'm going to ask you like, hey, this is, you know what I mean? Like we're going to have we tend to not, sometimes I'm like, hey, is there something you want to talk about? Like, okay, if you don't have something you want to talk about, I have something we need to talk about. like we'll give you the option if you think it's important to bring it up. But it was really tough. And I remember sitting on the bed with one of our kids and being in this moment where I literally had no words and I did not know what to say. But I knew in that moment of like, I can freak out because I don't know what to do or say, and because I'm so angry, like so angry at my kid, at the enemy, at the devil for like what just took place, and like the potential fallout, and like there was so much going through my brain in that moment. And I'm really, really thankful that like in high stress moments, I tend to like I'm less in control of myself when it's not that big of a deal, and more in control of myself when it's a big deal. Like I'm thankful for that. But like, I just remember being in that moment and just kind of being silent for a little bit. And it's like, my kid needs to know that I don't need to panic when he's panicking. Like, it's okay. I can, this is my opportunity to display the fact that I actually can and do trust Jesus and trust him in this process, that he's going to give us wisdom on how to navigate this. And like, all right, bud, let's look at this, and sort of like going through that sort of zone of like just being really conscientious of how I'm about to communicate, how I'm about to verbalize, and just recognizing like are you going to say something? It's like, I will in a second. I need to like not say anything for just a moment. Let's pray. I don't know if that makes sense. Like just recognizing that you're about to step into a zone, and learning to do that though with less important things, because like those less important things is what's really creating the culture. Okay, so remain in control of yourself. When you engage in anger or intimidation, you shut down your child's reasoning and turn on their fight or flight response. So this is the amygdala in your brain. It's like right up here, the frontal cortex. What happens is as soon as there's like the fight, flight, or freeze response, what happens is when your child, when you are getting demonstratively angry or yelling or you're intimidating, you know what I'm saying? What happens is that part of their brain gets so activated, it floods their brain with hormones that trigger this response. But what it does is it actually shuts down their reasoning capacity. Like it literally shuts it down. So you've probably had this experience where you're really angry and you're like, why did you do this? And they're like, I don't know. And you're like, yes, you do know. Why did you do this? And they're like, I don't know. They actually don't know. Their capacity to remember and process information is gone. Like hormonally, chemically, their brain is not functioning, and it won't function. For some people, it takes hours for that chemical process to de-escalate to where then they can actually clearly think. And what happens is if you know that when you step into that engagement and you're there, you have lost the whole point of what's going on. You need to recognize it and just be like, oh, pause. Let's just take a moment. You chill out. I'm going to chill out. We'll have, you know what I mean? We'll come back to this in a minute when these emotions have come back down. Because if your goal is to disciple them, is to use choices, they need to be able to think. They need to be able to make decisions. And if they are emotionally triggered in that place, if they're in that freeze, flight, or fight response, like your ability to sort of like use choices and consequences and that sort of process is out the window. And so you can help that by keeping your own emotion in control in those moments of not stepping through and communicating out of that place. So, empowering through choices and the classic battles. So we're just going to kind of look at some of the battles here and kind of go through some different scenarios and some practical sort of ways of how this looks. Sure.
Just read it real quick. All right, next section, like you said, empowering through choices and the classic battles. A lot of the classic battles aren't about obedience or the child's rebellious heart. They are about a godly desire for self-control. So those fill-ins are obedience, rebellious heart, and self-control. Remember that area of the brain is growing and they need to learn how to use it. Okay, next one is empower. Empower them through using choices. They will then feel a partnership with the process and invested with their own success. 2 choices that work for you.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like we've been sort of like talking about this like over the last sessions. And so this is where we're sort of like, you're going to empower them with those choices. You're going to actually like help them be invested in their own success of life and everything. So it starts at a young age. So here's just some fun ones. I like the alliterations. Bedtime bedlam, right? Mealtime madness, schooltime sorrows, tantrum throwing titans. Oh, that's a fun one. Tattling terrors, arguing opportunists. So we're going to take just a couple of these and kind of look at them, if that's okay. Let's if we look at bedtime, right? Like a bedtime, we'll go back to that scenario with our kids when they were little. So it's an easier example when they're really little versus when they're a little older, because bedtime becomes less of a problem, right, as kids get older. So some of these tools, what's really helpful is that if you're value driven, right, if you understand the value, some of these tools become helpful because they actually help you sort of manage yourself in the midst of your child learning. Your child's learning process can be kind of messy and difficult. You need to learn how to manage you while they are learning. While they are growing and maturing and experiencing life and struggles, you have to learn how to manage you. And so sometimes having these tools, for me anyways, are like, oh God, it's so much more helpful for me to sort of like navigate my own place of frustration while they're figuring things out. So we'll use a young one. Obviously, we have kids in here of all ages represented. So bedtime, So what we started doing with our kids when they were really little is we would start that bedtime process, and for us we honestly just did a couple things as part of bedtime, and there's a lot of advice around making this like huge routine around your child's getting ready for sleep, and honestly, I don't care. I just don't care. Because guys, I really don't. I know Savannah doesn't like when I say stuff like that. But the thing is that what I
The
found.
routine is fine.
Routine is totally fine. The thing is your success around bedtime is not based on how good your bedtime routine is. In the context of, did you do the bath, the this, the that? Yeah, for sure, consistency will help trigger your child into recognizing it's time to go to bed. But you know what your child really needs to learn how to do is they need to learn how to stay in bed. And they have to teach themselves how to go to sleep. They have to learn how to go to sleep. Because what happens when you're on vacation and you can't do that routine? What happens when they're staying at your parents' house and you want to go away for a weekend? Are they going to be able to go to bed? Because the routine, if their sleep is directly dependent on a perfect bedtime routine, then you are then handcuffed to that routine. Does that make sense? So the issue is with this sort of like zone of bedtime. Yes, there are very helpful routines that you can implement to make it easier, but really it's about your child learning how to like get in bed, it's time to go to sleep, and go to sleep. Like it's that like, and you can learn that. Obviously, like there can be struggles around it. There's a lot of compassion around, if you're having sleepless nights and all that kind of stuff. So if they're using choices, so like what we already described, right? It's like, maybe you guys do bedtime at a different time, but we'll just say 8 o'clock. It's like a few minutes to 8, and so bedtime's coming. And so it's like right away, if I know that this is going to be a fight, I start a few minutes early, and it's like maybe they're playing with their toys or maybe watching a show or something, whatever. And you're like, all right, do you want to go to bed now or in 5 minutes? Now, bedtime technically is in 5 minutes, right? But what you're already doing is you're preempting the conversation with choices where they are feeling like, oh, I get some say in this. Okay, like now and in 5 minutes. Most kids are going to pick 5 minutes, So 5 minutes rolls around, they don't get another choice. They already chose to be done playing with toys in 5 minutes. So you're not like, okay, do you want to stop now? That's not a helpful choice. I mean, there's a difference there, right? So then in 5 minutes, you're like, all right, 5 minutes is up. Do you want to run upstairs or walk up the stairs? And they're like, I want to play for 5 more minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. You chose 5 minutes before. Remember that? You picked that one. Like that was your choice. Essentially it's like, no, you picked 5 minutes. You can run up the stairs or you can walk up the stairs. Oh, I don't want to go up the stairs. Okay, you can decide or I can decide. And they're like, well, I don't want to go upstairs. Okay, I've decided. We're going to walk upstairs now, And it's essentially you're just staying on that train. So then you get upstairs and maybe they're like, start kicking and screaming. It's like, okay, buddy, you can walk up the stairs or I can carry you up the stairs. What do you want? And if they begin to act like, especially if they're young and they're escalating, it's like, all right, you can control yourself or do you need my help? Still screaming. Like that's when I use like a spank, like in that zone. It's like, you can control you or I can control you. What do you need? What do you need to be successful in this moment? You don't have to use spanks. You can use like a fuss time zone, which we'll just explain in a second. But like you can also do it like in that zone where it's like, go to your room until you're ready to be fun. Okay, I can carry you or you can walk. You know what I'm saying? Like there's that sort of zone. So anyways, you get upstairs, typically it's fine. At that point, if they're going to hop upstairs or walk upstairs, usually there's not a problem at that point. You go upstairs, you get up to the bathroom. All right, do you want to use this toothpaste or that toothpaste? Or do you want to brush first or do you want me to brush your teeth first? Because like Adelie, like she's in this zone right now. And it's fascinating when she can speak with such direct like opinion. It's startling. Like as young as she started talking really young and had very high verbal skills, but she can just be like, I want to do this, and then we're going to do that. And I'm like, it can almost be like, oh my gosh, like how do I manage this deal right here, So asking questions is kind of like, does that. So you ask the questions. I already gave this example, right? So then, you're in bed. Do you want to walk to bed, sit in bed, whatever, the whole deal. Go through. Do you want to pray first or do you want me to pray first? Well, I don't want to pray. Okay, well, that's not one of the choices. You can pray or I can pray first, whatever. Go through it. The light goes off. Well, I'm not tired. So then this is where where there's like consequences that like they get to experience, where you're still like the firm boundaries of like, okay, if you're not tired, that's okay. 8 o'clock is bedtime. So if you're not ready to go to sleep, then we can do some work. Like, the options aren't that you get to come down and hang out with us and watch TV or have a conversation with the adults downstairs. The options are bedtime or some chores, like we can just work and get ourselves tired. If you have too much energy, because like, let's be real, how many of you guys have gotten in bed and you just had too much energy and you actually did like, it was hard to go to sleep? Mason's like me every night. Which is normal. So the thing is that like sometimes your child really is like in this zone of like, I'm really not tired. So like you yelling at them is not going to make them more tired. It's going to make them scared and like to stay in bed, right? So if they really aren't tired, that's okay. Let's go burn some energy. And so like with Tristan, the first time we did it, I was like, okay, bud, we can do some chores, or you can go to sleep. If you're not tired, you can do some chores. He's like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to do some work. And he was thinking he was going to come down and like be with us in the kitchen and hang out. So we go outside. This is in Vallejo at that family's house that we were living at for many months. And so we go out. There's like this big sliding glass door, and there's a kitchen table right here. And then there's like a glass door like onto a patio. And so I'm like, all right, buddy, come on. So we walk outside, and I hand him a broom, and he's 4, maybe not even quite 4, like 3.5, 4. I'm like, okay, bud, here's the broom. You see these leaves right here? You need to sweep them off the patio. And there's like maybe 10 leaves. I mean, it was really, I don't know. It was not a lot. But I was like, okay, you can sweep these leaves. And he's like, okay. And I go inside. He's like, where are you going? I'm like, oh, I'm going inside. We're having time in there. He's like, what? I'm like, okay, buddy, have fun. But I just shuts the sliding glass door. And then he's like, I turn around and he's like at the window like this, weeping. Like at the sliding glass door. And I'm like, buddy. And I come like, buddy, what's wrong? like why? Like this is his world of problems, and I get to be an empathetic, loving father in the midst of his choices and world that he's creating around himself, And it's like, buddy, what's going on? I don't want to do the leaves. I'm like, oh, but remember you said that like you weren't tired, He's like, I'm tired now. It's like, oh, it's too late. Like we got to take care of this now. So here's the key. If I had at that moment been like, okay, you can go to bed, he would have understood that it was the threat of pain that was motivating his choices, not actual consequences. I scared him into wanting to stay in bed, not actually doing the chores. Many of us at this junction, at this sort of pivot point, we choose okay, you've learned your lesson, you've learned it enough. No, they haven't. They've learned that they can like get up to the point of pain and get a different response. They haven't actually had real consequences yet. And so he chose to do work, so we're going to finish the chore and then reevaluate whether you're still tired or not. So it's like, all right, no, buddy. Remember, you said you weren't tired, you wanted to do some work, so this is what we got to get done. But I'm tired now. It's like, okay, well, when we're done, we'll talk about it. Like, let me know when you're finished. And I went back inside. And of course, then he's just standing outside crying. It would have taken him like 5 minutes, maybe tops, to like just, like, I wasn't even expecting like I just needed to see him like move some leaves off. You know what I'm saying? He's 3.5, 4 years old. Like he's like, I don't know how to go back up. Like, hey, buddy, do you need some help? I'm not sure what to do. He was like, oh, okay. Do you want me to show you how to sweep? Yeah. Oh, okay. So hold the broom here, hold it here, and then just grab the leaf and pull it off. Okay, let me know how that goes. I go back inside. He's out there for another like 15, 20 minutes. And pretty soon he knocks on the window. He's like, I did it. And I go out and I'm like, what did you do? He's like, I got that leaf off. I'm like, oh, good. Look, we have a few more. Let me know when you're all done. And then, of course, he's like crying. So we had to like close the blinds on the glass because he was just like standing there like watching us, And so this is like, at this point, it's been probably 30, 40 minutes. I remember that night it was like an hour and a half before he actually got back in bed. I mean, it was a long time. So I go outside and he's like, Dad, it's cold. And he's just like standing there with the broom, not doing anything, just crying, And I'm like, buddy, what's going on? He's like, it's so cold out here. And I'm like, oh, do you want a jacket? Yeah? Okay, I'll be right back. Yeah, no problem. I'm going to help you with, you know what I mean? Like, because he's like, I can't be out here. It's too cold. I'm like, oh. So, like, I usually wear a jacket when I'm outside when it's this cold. Do you want one? Yeah. Okay, so I went and got a jacket, brought it back out to him. I'm like, all right, how's this? Okay, I guess, you know, and he's just like tears and like trying to like, he was like, all right, well, let me know if you need some more help, okay? I'll come back and check in on you if you need, you know, and shut the door. And then, you know, I think at that point is when he like did it. And I remember him coming back and like knocking, Dad, I did it. And instead of at this moment, like where he had actually done the chore and completed it, he was proud of himself. And all of a sudden now a consequence, instead of it being a punitive punishment, you've now earned like this thing, he gets this sense of like accomplishment. Like I swept the porch. Like I did it. I actually did this thing. You know, and I come out and I'm like, all right, well, show me. And he shows me the leaves that are swept up. I'm like, wow, that's a really good job, bud. Good job. Like, this is awesome. You did such a great job. Are you tired, or do you want another job? We have some other stuff that we can do too. He's like, no, I'm tired. I'm like, oh, great. Okay, let's go to bed. We go inside, get a little water, get up in bed. Went straight to sleep. Nope, no problems, right? Next day, I thought, man, it's going to be easy, right? Get through the whole thing. And he's like, I'm not tired. Because it was like we were living in someone else's house, and so there's a lot of activity downstairs. And like they had grown adult kids, and it's loud. They're watching TV, laughing. There's just a lot of activity. It's very stimulating for a 3 or 4 year old to like try to go to bed in that environment. I have compassion on him, but he still needs to learn how to do this. It's a skill, you know? And so, of course, I'm like, well, we can do some work. No, I'm tired. You know, and it was like we were good for another like week or so, and then it comes back on. I was like, no, I'm not tired. I'm like, all right, well, I got some other work. It's like, okay. We go outside, and they had like this sand, like right past the cement patio. It was like kind of like a sand dirt area, and they had like weeds like growing up through it. So that, okay, all right, buddy, what we need to do is you see all these little pieces of grass and weeds growing on the sand. We have to pick them all. He's like, what? He's like figuring he's just going to sweep off a few leaves. At this point, you know, he was ready. He's like, you're going to sweep off the deck? I'm like, nope, you already swept off the deck. It's clean. Look, we have to do this chore now. And it was like, and of course then we went through the whole process all over again of just like, why am I out here? It's cold. Oh, do you want a jacket? You know, the whole thing. It's like, I can't pick this up. I'm like, I think you can. You're really strong. I've seen you. We've wrestled. Like, I think you are strong enough to pull this out here. Go ahead and try. Let me show you. And I'm like helping him learn how to do it. And then I go back inside. He's out there for a while. And of course, it was a big area. But I was like, listen, if we can get this section done right here, then that'll be good. He did it. Eventually he did it, got done. And it's like, all right, buddy, are you ready for sleep, or are you tired? Or you want something else to do? No, I'm tired. We did that 2 times for sure. I don't know if we did it a third. I think the third one was cleaning cobwebs under the table.
Like, do you want to do the spider webs? He's like, no, I'm tired.
Yeah, because I think it was like that third time was like, no, I'm ready to do some work or whatever. It's like, okay, well, we have a bunch of spider webs up underneath the table that we got to clean all of those out too. He's like, no, I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired. Like, and after that, we never had a problem with him just like staying in bed and going to sleep. And it was like he would ask, I'm not tired. Oh, that's not a problem. We have some work to do. You know what I mean? And or you can go to sleep. Now here's the difference. We had some friends, we shared that story with, they were having problems with bedtime. And so they were like, they were going to try it. The problem was, it was their daughter who was a little older. Like she was around like 5, 6. And she loved being with people. Like, just loved it. Didn't care what she was doing as long as she was around people. And so they were like, all right, let's do some work. So they brought her and like, you can wash dishes, or, you know, same kind of thing, trying to do it. The problem is that she's doing dishes in the kitchen next to where her and her husband were like having conversation and hanging out. And her daughter was 100% okay. As long as she just was in a room with people, that's where she wanted to be. Didn't matter what she was doing. And I remember them asking me later, like, why isn't it working? She wants, like, she's asking for more chores. I'm like, well, what are these chores? Where are you guys? I'm like, well, she's just hanging out with you. Like, she doesn't care what she's doing. Like, she's getting what she wants in that zone. Like, those are not consequences that work. Like, the consequences have to involve, like, some discomfort in the context of the difference between bedtime and this uncomfortable chore late at night. You need to pick something that is like not next to you guys, if that's okay, you know, like, and so then they shifted it, and it was like, hey, it worked really well. Like, you know what I mean? Like once, and she's like, I want to do dishes. Oh, that's not one of the choices, honey, tonight. You can sweep the deck, or you can pick some leaves. Like, honestly, and it's like, even like, and that's where giving choices and the consequences are really helpful. So if you're in that zone of giving choices, like, even with Tristan, it was like, you can sweep the deck, or you can pick the weeds right here. Does that make sense? Well, I want to do this. That's not one of the choices. We already did that. You know, I think it was like, you can clean the cobwebs, or you can pick the weeds. You know, he's like, well, I want to pick the weeds. Great. So then when he's complaining about it, it's like, oh, you picked this one. Remember, you chose to do this. So all of a sudden now they are experiencing their choices, which means the next time you give them choices, they are already thinking about the ramifications of the choice they're about to make, versus just whatever quick choice they're doing. Mealtime. So mealtime is another like classic like place of frustration. Aside from getting into like opinions about like food and finishing plates and all of that kind of stuff, if your kids are like not finishing their food and like that becomes a problem, like especially like in the morning, you have to get out the door, school, or there's other things that are involved. You used to like have to stay at the table for hours, right? Like just a couple hours, whatever, trying to finish your vegetables. Like,
No, my dad would set a timer.
you would set a timer?
Yeah,
I
and
think I
I would
remember
get in
talking about it
trouble.
like, okay. That's funny. I thought, I'm remembering that wrong. Oh, well. But you can get a clock with like where they can see the minute hands and stuff. And it's like the kid doesn't want to eat their vegetables, but like they want a treat or they want dessert afterwards. And so they're just like stuck there, like slowly eating or whatever. It's like, this sucks. This is just like a common place of like frustration for you as a parent, where you're like, freaking just finish your food. Or like, we want to move on with our life. Like, we cannot have a 3-hour dinner time. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, just be done. Don't eat the food. I don't even care anymore. Just don't eat it. And then like, but I'm hungry and I'm what? It's like, so this is where their own consequences. So specifically around mealtime, I'm just going to bust a few myths here for you. Guess what? Your kids don't have to eat every meal. They are not going to die. They may feel like they're starving. They're not. I grew up with starving kids. There's a big difference between any of the children represented in this room and genuinely starving children.
I don't know. I agree with that, but there's sometimes I'm just like, I just want them to eat. Like, they have to eat.
Yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. When that is motivating how you're handling this, it will disempower you from allowing the pain of their consequences. What's the consequence for not eating? So you feel hungry. So when your kid is trying to go to sleep and their stomach is grumbling, it's like, you get to be with them in their consequence. I'm so sorry, man. This is like so tough. Like, I feel the same way when I don't have my dinner. It's just like, it's hard, huh? Like, oh man, do you want some water? You want to get a little bit of water and then we can get back in bed? Like, you're helping them navigate the pain that they are in, the pain that they're experiencing. And so, especially around like vegetables or things like that, like sometimes we would do like a clock on the wall, like, hey, dinner is done at this time. So if you're not finished eating, it's fine. But then we're not doing snacks. We're not like eating later tonight. We're not like, when you tell me that you're hungry because you didn't want to eat what we fixed for dinner, I'm not going to make you something different. This is what we're eating, and this is right. We never did the whole like making 15 different meals for every like person's like individual choices. It's like, sometimes we eat food just because it's healthy and it's not the most enjoyable, but it's okay. And it's not your favorite. That doesn't mean you don't eat it. Just because you don't, carrots aren't your favorite vegetable doesn't mean you don't eat them. And so you just sort of have these conversations of like, this is what we're having for dinner. Some people, like, that's not a problem for them. They don't mind doing the different meals. They don't mind whatever's. So if you're comfortable with that, that's okay. This is just a classic struggle in parenting. Does that make sense? Like, you can have, again, remember we talked about values that are driving your parental decisions and your goals around that. So if you don't mind the consequences of that, you don't mind going over to your friends' houses and your kids complaining about what they're eating and saying that something's disgusting to your friends, or if you don't mind having to make 10 different lunches and 12 different dinners, and does that make sense? Like, if you don't mind, like, honestly, I'm being sarcastic, but genuinely, if you don't mind, it's not a big deal. Like, as long as they're healthy, they're growing, they're going to be okay, right? If it is a thing for you and you do want to do it, you can manage it without it having to be this like place of struggle and pain. One of the examples in this book, Parenting with Love and Logic, is this mom. It's like the school time sorrows, things where she's like trying to get out. She was a single mom. She's trying to get out the door on time. She had to take the kid to school, and it was always a struggle. Just like this big classic battle, finishing breakfast, trying to get breakfast done, and then trying to get her kid dressed. And it's like they have to eat. They're going to go to school if they haven't had breakfast. It's like, it's true, right? Like the kids are like, it's crazy. Like it really affects their first like several like lessons that they're trying to learn, all this stuff, right? Just constantly like, it was just such a massive stress struggle. So she had like been through like a thing around choices. So she had like preemptively contacted the teacher and was like, hey, this is what this is what I have to do, right? I need your help in this. She's probably not going to finish her breakfast. Don't worry. She's had 35 minutes to eat her breakfast. This is what I'll be feeding her. You know what I mean? So she actually like convinced, so the teacher wasn't like, why is this child showing up in their pajamas not having had breakfast? She's like, we wake up at this time. She has plenty of time to do it. She is like, this is a constant struggle. And so I'm going to try with some of these consequences and choices. So she got her teacher actually like on board with them. And so it's essentially, so she kind of set a timer, did the whole thing. Of course, the kid didn't finish eating. And then it was like, okay, the kid was old enough to dress themselves. Like, all right, we're gonna walk out the door at this time. And of course, the kid wasn't dressed, And so she's like, oh, well, here's a bag. You can put your clothes in the bag, take it with you. And they got to school on time. It was amazing. And so then she shows up, not having had breakfast, still in her PJs, walking into her classroom, and had to like walk in. It was like first grade. I mean, it was like old enough to like it to be a problem. And it's like, this is your choices. And so, but because she had gotten the teacher's help on it, the teacher was like able to be like, oh, what happened? Oh man, I feel the same way. And it's like she kind of had the conversation with her teacher to like help be compassionate in the pain of the consequences, for that day. It's like fixed. You know what I'm saying? The next day, it's like they're dressed, they're eating breakfast, they're moving along. It's like, these are the sort of things that become like really big lessons for them. I kind of want to move on. Arguing is a big one. Tattling it's a big one. If you guys have questions specifically about that, we can, and during the question and answer, we can maybe get more specific. But if you see like how there's like there are appropriate consequences to their choices, and if you're committed to creating some boundaries where they're experiencing the pain of their own consequences, sometimes what will happen is you'll be having a place of struggle with a child, right, or your teenager, and what you can do is like game plan, right, with your spouse, or if you're a single parent, just like take an evening and like, all right, how are we going to address this? What's a strategy we can use where we can create some naturally occurring consequences to their choices? And then what you do is you graciously implement them and allow them to experience the pain of their consequences the next time that rolls around. A good example they had with arguing, like in this book, was we've actually had very similar things happen, where it was like the classic, like these kids were driving their kids to their grandparents' house. They were going to leave them with them, and whenever they got to the grandparents' house, they always had candy and treats for them. It's like, classic showing up to grandma and grandpa's house. And of course, they're arguing and the fighting in the car and this whole thing. One of the ways that you can give choices is by communicating the good consequences that are going to come from the decision. So it's like, hey, kids that know how to like treat each other well in the car are the ones that get treats. Right? So you're just letting them know, like, those are the ones that do that. And then, so they were like, all right, we're going to try this. So they could call the head to their grandma and grandpa's house, and we're like, hey, this is what's been going on in the car. We're going to try this. Can you help? They're like, of course, grandma and grandpa are like, yeah, of course. Like, well, whatever. So when we show up, I want you to ask if they've been fighting in the car, and what we're going to tell them is that kids that know how to not fight while we're driving are the ones that get to have treats at grandma and grandpa's house. They're like, okay. So what happens is they're driving, of course, they're fighting. They let them know, hey, this is whatever. They're controlling themselves in the car. Of course, they're like freaking out. They're super angry at like what's going on, but they're like, again, staying in that place. They show up to grandma and grandpa's house, and what does grandma say? It's like, hey, how was the drive? Were you guys fighting in the car? And they're like, yes. Like, there's like, they're like confused, like, why are we being asked this right now? And they're like, And she's like, oh, that's such a bummer. Kids that know how to like not fight in the car on the way to grandma and grandma's house, those are the ones that are like can have treats when they get here. Did you guys fight? And like I don't remember the exact details of like one of them did and a couple of them didn't or whatever, but essentially they were like, and of course it's like heartbreaking. Their kids are crying, starting to throw a fit, and then it's like you get to help them like learn how to like man, it's so sad. Like, man, come here. Do you need a hug? Like, I love you. Like, this is so hard. Like, I understand. There's like compassion in them all of a sudden now experiencing the pain of this consequence. The next time they drive to grandma and grandpa's house, they start fighting, and they were like, hey, kids that know how to get along are the ones that get to have treats when we get to grandma and grandpa's house. It's like, why? Because there was no threat involved. They actually just experienced those consequences in a way that was like they weren't fighting against it. It was not a them versus parents or them versus grandparents. It was just the naturally occurring consequences of something they set up. Does that make sense? So sometimes if you have like a struggle like that in a particular environment, you can kind of game plan and set that up in terms of setting up some consequences that, hey, within these boundaries, one for us was cleaning toys up. How many of you guys have like kids that struggle with cleaning their space up? God, everyone with kids should probably have their hands up. Yeah, totally. So what we did, we did this with Tristan and Cohen when they were little. Once they started getting older, again, it filters down to like the younger kids where you just have to like say the statement and like, so Tristan's like, he's young, he's trying to clean up. I'm like, oh, buddy, you got to clean up your toys. We're getting ready to whatever. And of course, nothing's cleaned up and we're cleaning stuff up. We're in someone else's home. It's like, it's really stressful. It's just a really difficult sort of like flow. So what happens is like we're like working on this stuff. I'm like, all right, we're gonna try this. We're gonna try this one out. We go in there. The Toys R Us like, hey, buddy, boys that know how to clean up their toys get to keep their toys. He's like, huh? I'm like, all right. So you see the clock here. When that minute hand gets to this number, I'm gonna come in and I get to keep any toys that I clean up. You get to keep any toys you clean up. So I'll be back. I leave. I come back. It was plenty of time, 30 minutes. And of course, there's like 2 things that are cleaned up. I'm like, oh, all right, no worries. He's like, no, I got it. I'm going to clean them. No worries. You go watch your show. Don't worry about it. Like, I got this. I told you I'm going to come clean up at this time. No, Dad, wait. I'm like, no, don't clean up. I'm sorry, it's over. Like, now here's the thing is like, I could have let him clean that up and he would have. But what would have happened the next time that rolled around? He would have waited until the threat of the consequence was there for him to then be motivated to do it. We don't want to train that. We want him to learn how to do it in the space that we're giving them. So I did. I'm like, hey, bud, I'm sorry. And then, of course, he's like breaking down. He's throwing himself on the ground and crying. Typical like 4-year-old behavior, 4 or 5-year-old behavior at this point. I'm like, hey, buddy, this is no fun. You need to go to your room. We had already established that sort of zone. So he did. He goes up to his room. He's crying and fussing. I clean it up, put the toys up on the top. Like there was a couple things we put up, a couple things we cleaned up. And he's like, am I ever going to get the truck again? I don't even remember. I think it was like there was like a giant Star Wars figure. It was just like, he's like, am I ever gonna? It's like, well, I mean, yeah, maybe. Like, maybe. He's like, well, how? I'm like, well, I have some ideas, And this is again where I'm not solving his problem for him, but I'm here if you need some help. So even think about your own life. How often, when you ask for advice, you're more apt to hear it and listen versus when someone's just telling you what to do and just lecturing you. And so this is where you're actually allowing your child to ask for some help. Like, hey, you let me know. I'll be in here. If you need some help, I have some ideas. He's like, I want ideas. I'm like, great. Well, some kids just climb up and pull those toys down and play with them anyways. How do you think that would work out? Not good. Like, it's like confusion. Like, wait, are you telling me I can just go do that? I'm like, yeah, totally. They're like, I'm like, yeah, that actually is true. Like that. It is a bummer. That wouldn't work out well for them. Well, what am I supposed to do? I was like, I have some other ideas. And I always try to I always give a couple of bad ideas because I want them to think about it. So it's like, well, some kids just throw fits and scream and cry or just don't ever get their toys back. They just figure something else to play with it. play with. How's that? Well, not good. I don't want that either, And it's like, well, okay, I have another idea. You let me know. You let me know if you want some help. Like, yeah, I want that one. So it's like, and then I'm like, after, usually the standard sort of just pattern is just 2 bad options and then a third good one, It's like, well, some kids will do some extra chores and like, you can actually kind of like buy back, like earn back those toys they're mine now, but I don't mind. I could totally exchange them for toys, for chores if you want. How does that sound? Yeah, what can I do? And he's like right away motivated to like be engaged. Well, what ends up happening is then we have him do some dishes. He's learning how to put dishes away, putting silverware away, like different things like that. All right, here you go, buddy. Next time to clean up your toys. Okay, bud. I'm going to be back in here at this time. I get to keep whatever I clean up. You get to keep whatever you clean up. The look in his eyes of like the realization of that was like, I come back in and it's just clean, spick and span. And to this day, I can just walk in and be like, hey guys, remember, I'm coming in 20 minutes. I get to keep whatever I clean up. You get to keep whatever you clean up. And their rooms are cleaned.
Wow.
When we let them know.
Yeah,
They don't necessarily
let them
keep
know.
them clean.
And
They're normal kids, guys.
We do have some where like Cohen would be like, okay.
And so, but when he does do that, it's like, all right, I follow through and I clean it up, and then he doesn't have it. And then later on, he's wondering, like, he would like, with like food stuff too, sometimes he doesn't care, sometimes he does care. And it's like, that's fine. When he was 2, 3, 4 years old, we would sit down and he didn't want to eat like something on his plate. It was like, all right, like we're going to have treats now. We're doing a movie night. And if you don't finish your vegetables by this time, like we're just not going to do treats. He's like, boys that finish their vegetables are the ones that get to have a little treat later. He's like, okay. I'm like, and the first time he did that, I was like, are you sure? Like, come on, buddy. We're gonna popcorn and M&Ms, and he's like, okay. Like, it's like really good though. The M&Ms like melt in there. I'm like, I'm trying to sell the treat, man, because I'm like, all of a sudden I'm realizing like this is not like I'm not getting him to do what I want. The reality is it doesn't matter. If that's his choice, that's his choice. And so what happened was because I'm expecting later for a massive breakdown, right, and for him to be upset. Well, that is his learning opportunity. For him, it actually didn't matter. We're all sitting there having treats, and he's sitting there happy as can be, watching the movie without any treats. Didn't bother him. And that was for a long time. I mean, it was a while of like, that would happen. He's like, okay, just not worth it for him. Like, he didn't want to eat that thing on his plate, and he can just go without the fruit snacks later. Like, what I'm saying? And we're all like literally eating like some candy or whatever, and like, he's just like,
And this is where like it can be really helpful to have each other and realizing like, okay, I'm probably more the type where like, okay, well, your dinner will be here all night whenever you're ready for it. I just want you to eat it. Like I just want these vegetables to get inside of you, or this meat or whatever. And having to really like, oh, okay, all right. And there's been many fights about these things.
Absolutely.
Or like homework issues and feeling like, okay, well, we have a plan to go out as a family and maybe go get some ice cream. I feel like we're talking about a lot of like junk food and treats, but okay. But like, okay, so later we're gonna go out as a family. We're gonna go get some ice cream. But everybody has to have their homework done. Like this is something that has to happen. And Tristan didn't have his homework done. Everybody else had gotten theirs done, but he's older, so it takes more time, and he just wasn't doing it. I remember,
we had given plenty of time, too. Yeah. This isn't like 10 minutes, finish your homework.
No, it's just a struggle with homework.
Yeah.
And so then he comes home, and I realize, like, Tristan's not going to do it. Like, it's too late. We're ready to move on with the evening. And so then I'm like, okay, never mind. Like, let's not do the family night,
She was trying to, like, make us cancel the plans with the rest of everyone because Tristan hadn't finished his homework because he wasn't going to be part of it. And that's understable. It's very compassionate.
No,
I get it.
It was a big deal. I'm like, we are not eating ice cream in front of him. We are not going to act like we're just having so much fun and he doesn't get to be part of it. And Dustin's like, yeah, we are. I'm like, this is wrong. I don't even want to go. We're not going. Everybody
I'm not even going to have a fun time with this thing.
Well, we did.
The thing is like, here's the thing is like, you're robbing that experience that is going to do the teaching. You're robbing it from your child. You're not helping them by moving forward in that zone. Like they need the reality of their consequences in their world that are appropriate to the dynamics of what's going on in their life now while you get to be with them. So Tristan's there crying, we're having ice cream, and I'm like, I just
Not
get
crying. He was old. This was
he was
not too
older,
long
but
ago.
it was sad. He was bummed.
Yeah, he was super bummed.
And it's just like, come here, man. Like, let me give you a hug. Like, I'm with you. Like, this has got to be really hard. What happened? Why weren't you able to finish your homework? You had a couple of hours. You got home from school at 3. It's 6 o'clock. Like, what happened? Well, it's just hard. And he literally had sat at the table and was just distracted for 3 hours. But outside of those sort of consequences, my choices are either get scary and intimidating and try to like force him to like stay focused, or him to learn what he needs to stay focused because he wants to. And this other zone all of a sudden now becomes this place of like, and we had set up the ice cream thing as well as like hey, let's do some rewards for getting homework done quick enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it was a struggle that had been happening, and it was like, all right, tonight, like we told them, like, hey, tomorrow we're gonna go out and do this. You know, just your homework has to be done before we go out, because we wanted like there to be like good consequences to your choices. Does that make sense? Sometimes in your world, you actually need to create good consequences to the good choices that you want to instill. You want them to do something good, there cannot only be bad consequences to negative choices. You have to have a reward system. God doesn't withhold rewards from our life. He's the rewarder of those that seek him. There's so many verses, you guys, in the Bible. There's so many verses that are directly connected to rewards in our life, promises fulfilled, that are connected to your choices. This is not a, does that make sense? Like we're not manipulating them. We're literally modeling like, hey, sometimes we have to create the environment where there's a good consequence to their good choice as well as a negative consequence to their negative choice. And so that's where, for me, it wasn't about trying to create pain in Tristan's life. It was that we had communicated a positive reward for them finishing their school or finishing their homework at the time.
And like, so even in that interaction, I'm like, well, you don't even like homework. Like you're like anti-homework,
I
you know?
am,
And like,
at
so
that age.
why are we even doing this? But it's like, okay, well then at some point you guys can step away, reevaluate what's actually important. Like, is this that important to us that it's worth the fight? But not in that moment after something's already been communicated. So once it's been communicated and like, okay, we're following through with this.
Yeah.
Like that would be later, like of realizing like, okay, this homework issue that we're, you know.
Well, part of it is also just like, yeah, it wasn't so much about, I disagree with the homework at the time, but he needed to do it for his, his school stuff at the grade that he was in. And it was like, there's stuff that I have to do all the time that I don't like doing. This is a life skill. This has now become a conversation not about whether I agree or disagree with the amount of homework they're giving a third grader. This is now a conversation of like, dude, our life is chock full of stuff that I don't want to do, and I need to do it. Like, this is a life skill now that we're talking about and working on. Does that make sense? And because, again, the goal of where we're going, I'm raising up a person that can be powerful in their choices and be disciplined in the things that are going to be beneficial for their life. Like, this now is about that. It's not about the homework. It's not about that sort of conversation. So hopefully that's like a good. The next page, page 7, has some consistent tools. So I want to sort of explain those for a couple minutes, and then we can kind of get into some questions and answers. So consistent tools, the no fun zone. So this sounds silly, but it works with teenagers just as well as it works with little kids. I use this when I worked in a group home. I use this when I've been on camps with teenagers and doing stuff like that. It works with our own kids. It works with my friends' kids. It's worked with honestly, like when I'm at obviously we're respectful, but I mean like when I'm at like my brother's house or whatever, and it's just like, it just works. Like somebody's like throwing a fit in front of you. It's like, hey, bud, this is a bummer. I actually want to hear what you have to say. This is like really hard. You can go to your room if you want to keep talking like that, or you can hang out here. This is the fun zone. Well, like, no, serious, bud. Like, no fun zone. Just go be no fun. It's okay. Like, I don't have a problem with it. If you need to have an attitude, go have an attitude, but not around this. This is the fun zone. you know, and like with teenagers, what's interesting is that like there is this thing sometimes where they need to learn how, like, when they are engaged in an emotional place, that they are hurting their actual desire of having a conversation and working a problem out. So you're actually helping them, like, learn how to navigate. When I'm escalated emotionally, I may need to go take a timeout. I may need to actually go de-escalate. I may need to go, like, calm myself down and process first. With, like, a little kid, the moment he could walk, man, I mean, we're talking, he's 2 years old. No fun, fun zone. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, that's no fun. And we used it for lots of things. We used it for him hitting or swinging or being crazy. We used it for him throwing temper tantrums. We used it for a lot of, like, just different behavioral problems that we were experiencing in our home versus chasing him around with a spoon, spanking him every time he did something we didn't want. Does that make sense? And the moment, like, developmentally in their brain, the moment a child is crawling is the moment you can start using consequences. So at that age, the only thing we used, like, real, like, actual, like, pain sort of consequences is we did this no touch. And I'm telling you, the moment they start crawling, if they reached for something we didn't want, we flicked the back of the hand. It was like, no touch. Took a couple of times, and it's like, no touch. We never baby-proofed our home. We'd go to my parents' house, and they wouldn't baby-proof their home. And it was like, they start to go to the Christmas tree, no touch. They pull their hand back and go play somewhere else. So, like, it works, but then what happens is, even at that age, as soon as they can start to understand right around their crawling developmental place, is they will start to understand no fun and fun. No fun. Fun. I know it sounds silly, but, like, literally, like, honey, this is no fun. See, it's no fun. This is fun. Oh. Like, they're screaming, okay, no fun. You just carry them and put them in. You put them in their room, like, okay, no fun. When you're ready to be fun, come out. You know, and you can actually use that in these zones. Like, Tristan, when he was, this is again, like, just, we started it with Tristan, but we've done this with all of them. But, like, we're talking he was 3 years old. Cohen wasn't even born yet. He was about to be born. And so, like, he would, like, be throwing a temper tantrum, no fun. And he'd walk himself to his room. And, like, the first couple of times, it was like, you can come out when you're ready to be fun. And he's like, I can just come out? You know, kind of looking at me, and I'm like, yep, come on out when you're ready to be fun. So he goes in his room and then just, like, walks right back out. But he's still, like angry and upset. I'm like, no, go to your room. When you're ready to be fun, you can come back out. So he's in there, like, a little bit, and he's like, comes out with a total fake smile. I'm like, are you ready to be fun? Uh-huh. I'm like, great. What were you saying? What do you need? And it's like, all of a sudden he realizes, like, yeah, I can actually just, like, look, we can have this conversation. And it worked really well, and, like, all the way through, like, lots of different things. If he's, like, having a problem with something and he's communicating in a not helpful way, in a harmful way, you know, like, you can just begin to use that as a tool of, like, hey, no fun zone. Go take care of your emotions. Go take care of your problem. When you're ready to talk, I'm out here. I'm here for you. This is a fun zone, you know? And so sometimes even identifying certain behaviors as no fun or fun. I understand there's a lot of, like, stuff on social media right now about whatever. But the thing is that there are behaviors that are just not fun, right? Can we just agree to that? Like, there are ways of relating that are just not fun. And sometimes it's not really coming from a big problem. Sometimes it's just coming from weird emotions, lack of sleep. Like, there's sometimes legitimate reasons. The problem, though, is we'll create those excuses in our mind and then be permissive with our children, and they don't understand that. They don't understand that, oh, the way that I just threw a temper tantrum was really because I'm so tired. When I'm not tired, I should not throw temper tantrums. What they understand is it's permissible to do temper tantrums. And so what happens is you need to be consistent in the zone that you're creating in your home, because it will translate into other environments, shopping centers, parents' houses, friends' houses. And when you get consistent with something like no fun, you can use it in other environments, and they understand what that means, and they learn what that means. So it's and so then that goes right into sort of hassle time. Hassle time is sort of like another way of, like, saying time out. The reason why we use a different term is timeout for a lot of people becomes punitive. Like, you did something wrong, so now you have to go to timeout. That's punitive, right? That's punishment. Hassle time is like, hey, buddy, when you're throwing a temper tantrum, you're hassling me. Like, I have to take time out of my day and what I was working on to deal with the problem that you're creating right now. That's taking time away from me. You're going to owe me that time back. Like, does that make sense? And so like the timeout is connected to, like, you could have asked me this in a non-hassling way. Like, this didn't have to be this sort of zone. What you do is you practice with like a few different things, and then you're in a grocery store, your kid starts throwing a fit. I've done this like multiple times where you're there and you're like, hey guys, when you ask me 30 times if you can have an Oreo cookie, you're hassling me. Or fighting. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you guys, the fact that you're fighting in this aisle, or every time you reach out of the grocery cart and you touch an item on the rack, that's hassling me. I have to stop what I'm doing and do that. Your control or my control. Like, the hassle timer is going to start. And they're like, at first it's kind of like, okay, so when I start the hassle timer, it starts with 5 minutes. Now, not when they're really little. This is when they're a little older. But it starts with 1 minute or 2 minutes. You know, typically, if you've never done any sort of timeout, hassle time sort of thing, a child can handle initially 1 minute for every age every year of their age. So a 2-year-old can sit still for 2 minutes. They can learn how to do that. 3-year-old, 3 minutes. 4-year-old, 4 minutes. If you've never done anything like that before, but once they get into the zone of it, that time frame can increase quite dramatically. And so what happens is like the hassle time is there. So all right, the hassle timer started 5 minutes. No, all right. And then every time they do something, just another minute added. Okay, you're at 6 minutes. You're still hassling me. That hassle timer's still going. You know? All right, we're at 7 minutes now. No, but you don't. We're at 8 minutes now. And like eventually they, like, especially if you've already been practicing it in your home, when you're out, they'll get it a lot quicker. It's like when you get home, it's like, all right, guys. When they're a little older, you can do chores as an exchangement of hassle time oftentimes. Like, you owe me 10 minutes. All right, like, I needed to clean the chicken coop. That took me way too much time. I have to start cooking dinner now. So, you know what I mean? Like, they're out there doing the chores that you would have done as an exchange for that hassle time, because the task that you were working on took that much, you know what I mean? Potentially took that much more extra time because you were dealing with their stuff. That's as they get older, they start to understand that. At a younger age, sometimes it just looks like, all right, they're going to sit still now in a chair for 2 minutes. And the timer resets every time they get up. You know, so they're like 2 minutes, 2 years old. All right, here we go. You sit them there, and initially you're going to be engaged in this. Like I said, it's more work. It is more work to do this. It is not easier. It's a lot harder. What happens is you build consistency with it, and then everything else becomes a lot easier and less stressful for you, less threatening for you. You don't have to use these other ways to threaten their behavior or like threaten the consequences for what they're doing. And so it's like they're there and they start to move like, oh, buddy, I'm so sorry. The timer just reset. All right, here we go. Set the timer, set him down there. But I'm really thirsty. Oh, that's such a bummer. I'm so sorry. It just started over again. But I know every time you talk or you get up from the chair, the timer resets. You know what I mean? They're like watching the clock. They're like, they're there. It's just like, and then finally they do it. And like, that was so good. Good job. High five. Like, I mean, I congratulate them on like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like doing their consequences, whatever it happens to be. It's like, dude, you crushed it. Good job. Boom. There's like a sense of success. Like, yeah, we can do this, you know? And then it's like, it starts to increase, you know? So empathetic consequences, communicating the good consequences. That's what I was saying about like, hey, like you get to keep whatever toys you clean up. Right? Like that's like communicating the sort of the good consequences with it. Kids that finish their homework get to have ice cream when we go out tonight at 6 o'clock. Like that's the good consequence for that. So you're not necessarily having, the opposite is implied. Does that make sense? So you're not necessarily always having to threaten a negative consequence to motivate the good behavior. Find ways to communicate the positive consequences associated with their positive choices and allow the opposite implication to just be there as the consequence. What happens if I don't finish at 6? I don't know. What do you think will happen when you don't finish your homework at 6? Well, I don't know. Well, what happens if you finish your homework by 6? I get ice cream? Great. Well, what will happen if I don't finish? Well, what do you think will happen? I won't get ice cream? That's pretty smart. Yeah, that's what I would think too. I mean, you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden it's like, it's like this conversation where you're like, yeah, it's like, good job. Like you're thinking it through. You are thinking through the consequences for your choices. That is what I'm trying to help you do in this exchange. So last thing, consistent tools. You got to practice at home. Find ways to practice at home. Here's a couple catchphrases we're going to do kind of quick. So the uh-oh, no problem, which means no problem for me, possible problem for you. So I love this one. I feel so fun. Like I feel like so good when I get to use it when the kids are like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. Oh, that's no problem. wait. They're like, it's not a problem? It's like, well, it's not a problem for me. It might be a problem for you. This isn't my room. Like, well, what do you mean? Well, if I have to clean it up at whatever time, like I get to keep whatever I clean up. I'm like, I've always wanted that Lego set. I didn't have that when I was a kid. I definitely had that conversation, And they're like, wait, no. It's like, let me know. You walk away. And instead of me being angry and frustrated and like harping on them to get something done, it honestly, it actually allows me to stay in control of my emotions in those engagements. And it becomes kind of fun. It shifts for me personally. That, the uh-oh phrase, that one was always the there's consequences coming down the rail. Like, uh-oh. You do it in a sing-songy voice. So everyone can try it all together. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. A little smile on your face. You just smile and you say it. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Hey, that's no fun. That's fun. No fun. Fun zone. You can take and put them in their room. You can come back out when you're ready to be fun. They start coming out like, uh-oh. And you just use that oh man, we're talking like I said, to this day, the kids are doing stuff. I go on, I'm like, uh-oh, that's a bummer. And they're all just like, what? I don't know what just happened. But yeah, it's it is that. I'm like, ugh. That is, uh-oh. And so there's this, that it carries the weight. And what this is just a fun tool that if you practice and use it, it helps you stay in control of yourself so that the goal of what you're supposed to be doing as a parent can still be achieved. And you're not caught up in an emotional battle. Does that make sense? This tool is not some magic thing. It's just to empower you to not be in an emotional battle with your kids all the time. And the more that you can have a couple go-tos that just instead of getting angry, oh man, that's no problem. You just get to be there. So here's a couple things. So this is the arguing thing, right? When they're throwing back at you, it's whoa, but Cohen did this to me and he said this. I'm like, I know, probably so. Just empathetic and understanding, but we're not arguing. I'm not going to debate you in this place. And so just having this, I know, probably so, maybe so, that could be, I don't know, nice try. You just have some things is when they're freaking out, here's the thing, is they are going to freak out when they're experiencing the pain of those consequences. It's so cold out here, I'm going to freeze to death. That could be. I've never seen, no parent in the world would ever make their kid come out and pick grass in the middle of the night. And maybe so. I'll come back out and check on you in a little bit. I'm just but the thing is, I don't have to argue with them. It doesn't make it true, these things that they're going to say. And so when you can have a couple go-to phrases like this, it just helps you not engage in the emotional battle. They're trying to draw you in. Yeah,
and usually you hate me or
oh man,
I hate you, or just the things that make you what did you just say?
Is this because you haven't eaten today, Dad? Oh boy, it's on. So it's that kind of stuff where it's we just don't, because here's the thing. How many times have you said something you don't mean when you're emotional? Now, it doesn't excuse when they're saying negative things. So there's times when our kids have freaked out and said stuff, and I'm like, time out, buddy. You know you can ask me any question or bring up any conversation, but when we begin to name call, we cross a line that it hurts the relationship too much to continue. Is there something that you'd like to say? You know what I'm saying? Sometimes there's consequences, sometimes there's not. So again, like I said, there's still boundaries that we have in the midst of that, but I'm not being drawn into an emotional battle. Now, if you've never done anything like this and you are coming out of a crisis environment, it is marvelous to watch parents engage in this where they've been in an emotional battle with their teenager for years and then all of a sudden disengage from the emotional battle. Their teenager freaks out. And the parent just sort of stays in that place of not engaging in the emotional argument. The teenager storms out, whatever, and then later they come back and it's they're able to have the conversation of Like, you're just using tricks because you went to a parenting class. Absolutely. Maybe so. You know, like, could be. That could be. I could just be using tricks. You know, like, it's just like, that might be happening, you know? Like, and then later it's like, yeah, I haven't been parenting well. I am going to use tricks. I'm going to change how I'm parenting. You know, like, we are going to make a shift here. These are some things that need to adjust in how we're approaching things. Your control or mine. That one's a fun one. That's the, like, if you can't control yourself, you're inviting my control systems into your life. This will not be fun for you. Like, I'm letting you know, like, now, you don't want my control in this area. As long as you control you don't need my control. So sometimes, like, when they're freaking out, or like there's like that sort of like they're out of control, like even in the grocery store, sometimes it's like your control or mine, bud, you know? And obviously, like, if you use Spanx all the time at home, when you're in the grocery store, like, you're like, can I now? Like, no. And a lot of times, no, you can't. And you're going to feel too embarrassed to, and then you're going to feel powerless to deal with your child's behavior. So if it's the only tool you know how to use, you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot a little bit, because then you don't know what to do when you're out in an environment where that would be inappropriate, or it wouldn't really work or make sense in that situation. So the more other tools, if you can have a few other go-tos where Spanx is like not your primary source, you know what I mean? Like, in our home, what we've done is Spanx got like moved way back to like, if there's just like out of control defiance, or in a little child where they're not controlling themselves, and they're like being like crazy, like trying to pick up a child, and they're like, you know, throwing themselves like out of whatever, and it's like, I kind of just let them. I don't drop them where they get hurt, but it's like, you just kind of like, I'm not gonna do this with you. Your control or mine. And it's like, it's like, okay, it's your choice. I let you know, you know what I mean? Like, you're choosing this, you know, that sort of thing. But if they don't, it's like, okay, great. Like, we just, you know, like, for me, obviously, she's encountered it more with a couple of the kids sometimes, where they're throwing themselves out, you're trying to pick them up and move them somewhere, you know? So does that make sense? These are like some catchphrases. Obviously, those are like some narrow circumstances in which we use them, but they really do translate into some really big scenarios. I actually used this maybe so that could be, I don't know, nice try stuff when I was in a group home with like some of the most emotionally disturbed teenagers that you could be in a group home with. And it was crazy to watch these teenagers that had like so much history of being out of control, having to be physically restrained, just super abusive, coming out of abuse situations. Like, it was crazy. And I'd walk in, and like, they're like trying to do their chores. I'm like, hey bud, you can do this, or like whatever. And they're like, they were shocked at all of a sudden having to make a decision and like work through that stuff. And so it's just like, it's really powerful, like, when you can grab a hold of this, how you can implement it into different environments, because it's like, it's capitalizing on the developmental stages that they're in, and in a fundamental need that they have for control. So this last little bit, I'm just going to kind of give you these fill-ins, because it's basically just review of all that we've been talking about for the last little bit. So tools of the trade, right? Establishing your parenting values and goals. I really recommend, if you don't know them, having a conversation as a couple, or thinking through it by yourself if you're a single parent, and working through what your values and goals are in your parenting. And, you know, you can try different things. You can try different tools to see what works for you, what works in your family flow, you know. Let consequences do the teaching, not your lecturing. Lecturing, obviously, it's kind of a thing that I use wrongly, you know, like it's not helpful. Having a conversation or like instructing, there's times to do that. But you guys know the difference, right? Between lecturing and, you know, when you're having to teach your child something. Sometimes they sound the same. They shouldn't, though. Because they will probably think you're lecturing. Lecturing fundamentally teaches kids that they aren't smart enough to figure things out for themselves. It really does. It also says that what I'm saying should be taken as punishment, not as a gift of wisdom. Don't throw your pearls to swine. Like, you think you're giving wisdom to your child, and it's not. You're literally casting pearls to the swine, because they are not thinking of it that way. They are experiencing your lecture as punishment for what they've done. How do we know this? How many kids are like, yeah, I wish I would have done that, man. I'm just going to get lectured. Like, the lecturing becomes the punishment. Does that make sense? And you don't want that. If you really do want to teach your child, you really want to instruct them, you want to give them wisdom, set yourself up for success and set them up for success in that thing. So, all right, phrases to learn. These are just like review about some of the stuff. We're going to shift into question and answer. So I'm just going to kind of read through this. So it might trigger some questions or whatever that you might have. So what are you going to do about that? You don't get privileges until you've cleaned up your mess. So there's like this question of like, well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Why? It's their mess, their choices, their consequences. And you're asking them, what are you going to do? I don't know. I can help you if you want. I have some advice, Let me know when you figured it out. I have some ideas. If you need some help, I'll be in the living room. That's a fun one. Like, let me know. What are you going to do about this? Like, they've spilled something, or they've, made a mess, or they've like hurt someone or something. It's like, what do you want to do about this? I go, well, I don't know. Okay, well, you think about it. You figure it out. If you need some help, I'll be in the living room. You let me know. And you let them work through that. Then here's like the illustration of giving a couple options that aren't good, so they have to think about it and work it out, and then having a third option that has like a good option there. What did you do about that? Sometimes when there's like the tattling thing or like the stuff like that, the question is like, well, what did you do about it? Like I'm putting it back on their shoulders. I'm letting their world be their world, and I'm coaching them through it. How'd that work out for you? Wow, that sounds really tough. I'm here for you if you need help. I love you. I love you. It sounds really tough that you're going through this, but I'm here with you. That's such a bummer. What are you going to do about that? Sometimes you can say that's such a bummer in a real sarcastic way. I recommend not doing that. Wow, that's a bummer. But like having a phrase like that you use, like, man, that's a bummer, like lets them know, like you're not having to say like, wow, you really screwed up, kid. But it's like, it acknowledges the fact like, man, that's a bummer. What are you going to do about it? So putting it back on their shoulders. On a good day, you control everyone else. No. Yourself. On a good day, you control yourself. Use boundaries that teach self-management and reinforce your values and goals. It's the no fun zone. Feelings aren't the problem, but how you communicate them can be. If you need to fuss, go to your room until you can get yourself under control, then come back and try again. Don't play the blame game. So you're not letting them play the blame game. You're not playing the blame game. Like you don't blame other people for your stuff. Like, oh, it's because you're tired that you're throwing a fit. That might be, but that doesn't help them learn how to not throw a fit. Does that make sense? Like there can be compassion because your child is tired. There can be a lot of compassion in the midst of whatever, but like you're not helping your child by giving them all of these reasons for what's happening. This last page is just some resources, some just different tools and books and stuff that we found that were really, really helpful in the midst of what we're doing. So like under the category of personal growth, this is the Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. Keep Your Love On, right? Danny Silk.
Even with that, Keep Your Love On, so good. So good for like vision. I feel like that's kind of where we started, I think, like many years back. And I just feel like it brought so much perspective for me and like healing, like, oh, I needed to know this. I needed to know like God's heart for me as a child and like what I can give to my kids. So that was really helpful. Heart Made Whole is really, I feel like so transformed by that. Unfortunately, some of her later stuff is not so good, and I wouldn't recommend it personally.
Yeah, actually, honestly, I forgot that this was on this list. I would have taken it off.
This was like so transformational for me, though, the first few sessions of what.
Yeah, she did like a podcast and wrote a book like years ago that was like good. And then after that book, she like fully deconstructed and sort of just like in her own crazy, heretical world, to be really frank. It's really sad. But it doesn't like invalidate sort of like this, like that book actually like processing stuff in your heart and connecting to Jesus. And it is kind of the deal. My parents had a podcast, Out of the Box with Steve and Lorraine Box, which was good. They had a lot of like leadership and personal growth stuff in there. Parenting, specifically, Love and Logic, Magic for Early Childhood by Jim Fay and Charles Fay. They have an audiobook. We actually got it from a public library and listened to it. It's really, really helpful. And they go through really specific like illustrations on how to use choices in the context of parenting. Some of the illustrations I used was from that. We've used specific tools that they've given and like ways of using choices, and they're really successful. It's
Yeah.
not, it's like it's shocking how well it works.
Yeah, and I'm pretty
So-
sure it's like they actually have something for every age.
They do, yeah.
Potty training, early like crawlers, all the way till teenagers, and it's so practical and so helpful. I feel like sometimes I don't know, like especially with like Danny Silk stuff, it's like so good vision, but like, okay, well now how do I use that for this specific problem that I'm having? Well, I feel like the Jim Fay and Charles Fay, like
Yeah.
Love and Logic is just so helpful for that.
Yeah, they give a lot of, especially when you have the ones for the different categories, they're really specific, and they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. So, loving your kids on purpose, the 5 love languages of children. This last category, talking to kids about sex. I really want to encourage you guys, regardless of your personal process of learning about sex and the conversations you had or didn't have with your parents about sex. In today's culture, I really strongly encourage you to have open and frank conversations about sex, sexuality, starting at a very young age, but like you need to be age appropriate with those conversations. We've always used real body part names for all of the body parts. We never used foo-foo and Finkelberry and whatever else. I don't know, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just silly. But what's really helpful is when there's been like problems, they're able to like use the right language. There's no confusion on what it is. You know, obviously then you have your 3-year-old running around with like, boys have a penis and girls have a china. And you're like, oh God, like, what did we do? You know, like, you gotta have those conversations and work it out and like teach appropriateness and all that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you what, those problems are way easier to deal with than the flip side of not having had conversations around body parts, sexuality, and sex. You know what I mean? So like with some of our kids, we've done it at a little bit slightly different ages. But I'm telling you, when I taught sex ed to 8th graders, and I was shocked the number of kids that were like, how many of you guys, this is your first conversation you've ever had about sex? This is 8th grade. How many of you have talked to your parents or your parents talked to you about sex? And like, so like, unless they had been in that school where they had like sex, that was state required to start it at 6th grade. Like, if they hadn't been in that school, most of them had not had a conversation. By 8th grade. And so they're out there navigating this world of pornography, sexualization, all of those different things, and your voice should be the primary influencing voice in these conversations. And if you're not leading the conversation, it's not the primary voice, and it should be. So learn. These books are really, really helpful because it does age appropriate conversations starting at 3 and 5 years old. So it's really helpful because it breaks it down. It kind of helps you navigate, like, is this appropriate for a 5-year-old to have this conversation? Like, they're 10 now. What should they know? What shouldn't they know? Like, that's that sort of conversation. So these are really helpful. There's other ones out there. These are ones that we recommend. They're really good. They just did a reprint with better covers and stuff. And so, is that okay? Good. So these are just resources to continue to grow and just develop as awesome parents. All right. Switch sides?
Yeah, could you switch sides with me?
Okay.
It's my neck's hurting like so bad.
Oh.
I'm sitting for so long.
Hold on, guys.
The other way, then I'll feel a little bit
Okay.
better. Is that okay?
Awesome. All right. Well, let's do this. We have a few minutes to wrap up. I hope that you guys wrote some questions down. We wanted to take some time to have some question and answers. And I figured because it was parenting stuff, we could just do it more interactive versus like anonymous questions. But that is trusting the fact that you are going to be willing to ask some questions. So it could be really about anything from like starting from last night, obviously. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that you're going through all the way through just this last little bit of more practical tools and stuff. But let's do it. Let's jump into some questions. Yeah.
So I missed the very beginning of the hassle time.
Okay.
But so hopefully who tends to have these explosive things that come out always during school hours.
Oh, perfect. But never in the rest of the time.
Takes 1 to 4 hours to resolve.
Oh,
And we can't get past it, but it always goes from like this thing that seemed like this was like this rebellion against school
yeah.
to eventually getting to the root of the issue, because that's always my goal, always with my kids, is
Yeah.
there's something else going on and so it's always leading through, which is why it takes so long. But then I do point out the fact, like this took like our whole day, like your attitude and this outburst is taking away from everybody else getting my time for school and my ability to make dinner and all these other things. But then it turns into like, well, I'm just such an inconvenience, and like
Yeah.
them, because they kind of have that outlook already of like this.
Yeah.
This perfectionism thing, even though like I've worked really hard not to put that on me, because I used to have that struggle
Yeah.
doing that. So I'm just curious, like how, like what you would suggest to curb that, because I feel like the hassle time thing would be a great idea as far as like them seeing that you're taking away, but it tends to be a true heart issue that they
Yeah.
end up working through. So is it worth taking the 1 to 4 hours to get to the root of the problem then, or like
Yeah.
do you have a way to curb that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Did you guys hear what she was asking? Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. So what honestly, if I were to like prescribe something, no, I would honestly use a combination of like no fun and hassle time in that context. The reason why is that the emotional outburst, right, is like coming from real issues, but like the amount of time it's taking to process it and the amount of time it's like is just overboard. And even the way that this child is communicating the emotions, it's not in a healthy way, right? So like the problem isn't that they have strong emotions. The problem is not that they have some things that they need to voice or communicate or have a problem with. The problem is that it's taking so much time and it's disrespectful probably. It's probably loud and rude in some ways, and right? So like all of these ways are like not helpful. That's not fun, right? And so like honestly, like the hassle time for me is usually used more in like an immediate sort of like context of like, hey, we got something to get done. You're hassling me. You know better. Like we've done this as a deal. Like you know what's expected in this sort of zone. That to me is like a quick sort of deal. When there's real stuff that needs to be processed, like usually it's like, okay, your emotions, you're not communicating them well. It's like no fun. That's no fun. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to communicate respectfully. Go to your room. When you're ready to be fun, you can come down. How long? As long or as little time as you need to calm down. But I'll be here. I'm ready to talk to you about it. I'm ready to listen to what's going on. But this is no fun. And I would honestly start there and working to get like that 1 to 4 hour time frame down to where it's like what happens is it takes that long because she or he, I honestly don't know. I just said she, I know you're older, but like regardless of them, like if they are emotionally escalated in that way, it does take a couple of hours to actually come down. So like your conversation was fruitless for the first 3 hours until the final hour when she's like he's actually de-escalated like hormonally, chemically in their brain. Does that make sense? And so having the conversation in that intense way and trying to work stuff through, it's keeping that intensity there. It's not allowing this child to like process and de-escalate themselves. And so the first thing they need to learn is how to de-escalate themselves and not get into that zone. It's like, hey, emotions, not a problem. The way that you're communicating them is, I love you so much. I'm here with you. I have to teach the rest of the kids, go to your room, process, calm down, come back down, and we will talk. I'll sit and we'll have a conversation. See how that goes. See if it like can go quicker. And then after you sort of have that sort of zone, sort of establishing like, all right, during school time, if you choose to continue to have outbursts in this way, I'm going to start a hassle timer. What does that mean? It means you're taking time away from me teaching school to dealing with your problem. Now your problem is fine. It's okay. The way that you're choosing to deal with this is not helpful in this setting. So it's okay if you want to do that, but I'm going to start a hassle timer and you're going to owe me that time back. Does that make sense? Versus like just starting with hassle time. Like if there really is heart stuff going on and there's just like emotions and like this person needs to like learn how to handle that and deal with that. But you also got to deal with your other kids. So it's like, go scream in your room. That's fine. If that's what you need, like to like de-escalate, like, and if they're in there for too long, and this is where it's like with my kids, like there's been times where I've sent them to their room to calm down and they didn't calm down. Like they escalated themselves. Like that time with Tristan screaming at himself in the mirror, like that's where I'd go and like, hey, you're not actually taking advantage of this room time. You're not calming yourself down. Do you need my help? Like sometimes, and not my help in terms of, I've said that one time, do you need my help? And they were like, no, I don't need a spank. I'm like, no, that's not what I meant. Because sometimes I use like, do you need my help or can you do it on your own? Is like, my help is a spank. Like at times you're like, yeah, I'll take your help. I'm like, great, okay, it's a spank. So, but like, do you need my help? Do you need a process to calm down? But oftentimes they can actually learn that on their own and just figure that out. So I would start there. Yeah. Yeah.
So I love this like no fun zone. I have this thing of like it's just more fun to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the saying, like all about this. Now, what I'm wondering if you've seen or like from your experience and whatnot. I'm kind of speaking from personal experience, even
Mm-hmm.
like growing up, but like when they are sent to their room or like to the no fun zone, do you think that it can teach them that they only belong when they are fun?
That's a great question. So no fun zone, could it inadvertently teach that they only belong when they're having fun or when they're, like basically, when I am pleasant, then I get accepted. So the question to you is, are you accepting them when they're unpleasant? Is love ever on the negotiating table? Are they always able to give you a hug? Are you able to sit with them in their mess? Are you able to be with them when they're unlovely or unlovely? That those will, I think, honestly, like balance out that potential, like to train them. Like, hey, you only get to be around people when you're pleasant. Like your emotions are unacceptable around people, right? Like that could be the potential downside of that language and where that goes. And so for me, it's just like, man, I sit in the trenches with them. Like I make sure that like when they are like messy and ugly and frustrated and a mess, I'm with them. And they like, even with the no fun zone, and they're like, but I just need a hug. It's like, oh, great, come here, buddy. I love you. Like I love being with you. The way that you're speaking right now is not fun. Go to your room when you're ready. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's this other balancing side of making sure that you're there engaged with love in the midst of when they are freaking out. Like it's never on the table,
Yeah, and I think even, oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Showing that, like, actively engaging that love, would you ever sit in the no fun zone with them?
You could, if you felt like it was like an issue. Yeah. I wouldn't normally necessarily in like normal life, would be really inconvenient.
Oh, yeah.
But there could,
I have a 2-year-old.
yeah.
I'm not there.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like the reality is that like it wouldn't work for all times. However, that like if you're sort of like, if there is a concern for that, and it's like, yeah, like step into that. Use the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. Like stay engaged in that place. Practically speaking, though, like for a lot of the kids, it's just like, go to the room when you're not screaming. I'm ready to listen. Just don't scream at me. Like that's no fun. Like it's just like you make it as like not a big deal that like you got to just go like deal with stuff, come back and talk. Like it's just more successful that way. And but yeah, if you're feeling that, I know you wanted to.
I think too, I think most of the time, like we're not like just, I don't know, like hanging out like all smiley all the time. Like
Yeah.
I'm so happy all the time. Like, yay. Like we have our emotions. I feel frustration or sadness or anger or whatever it is. And I am expressing those in some way or either on my face or whatever. And so if they're coming into the environment and they're sad or upset, like that's fine. I think it's more what we're hitting on is more like the tantrums, the throwing yourself on the ground, the yelling, the fussing and the whining and like those kind of irking things that are like, hey, this is a shared space down here. Like we are, and I say down here because for a lot of our years we are living in a little condo with an upstairs, but you know what I mean? So, but usually like kitchen area or dining room or living room area, there's a few shared spaces where we all just have to be, and having those kinds of outbursts that are like, it's just really hard to function if you're like on the ground or yelling or whining or fussing or, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So then it's like, okay, need to figure out what's going on. Go look at these things, go take some time away. And then when you're ready to engage back into this shared, peaceful, fun space or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
Yeah, it's definitely like, that's really important, is that like, that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be bummed, angry, all that stuff. The way that they're communicating that could potentially be a problem. And even just the awareness of like, man, when I have a stinky attitude and I'm not fun to be around, like nobody, like it can sour relationships. Obviously when they get a little older and it's like, you get to have those conversations of like, bud, like when I'm like super pouty and I'm in here in the office, I get comments. Like nobody wants to be around me. It's really not fun. Like Jamie's like, dude, what's wrong with you? What did you like? Did you just like not sleep last night? Like, dude, like it actually affects me as a grown adult when I don't know how to manage the emotional world that I'm in. I either need to take care of that or I need to learn some skills to not just put it on everybody else and make my emotions everyone else's problems. Like that's an actual skill that you need to learn as an adult. And like I shouldn't shield that from my children, maybe when they're like 2, 3, and 4, but it's where that conversation is going, if that makes sense. Yeah. I know you had your hand up, but.
I was thinking that it kind of also doesn't also tie into the choice idea that it's not that they're being banished to their room, they're not being sent away because they're unacceptable.
Yeah.
It's that you're not choosing to interact with people. You don't want to be around people. You just want to scream and yell and emote. You just want to make a scene.
Yes. Emote.
You're choosing to not be social. So you're choosing to separate yourself from people right now. So come back when you choose to be around people.
Yeah.
When you choose to be in a mood where you can interact with us. We're not sending you away.
Yeah.
We want you here. But
Yeah.
you don't want to be here.
Yeah. That's really good. And that's exactly what that is. That's really good. Yeah. Any question? Anyone else? Yeah.
So you guys appear to have a very organized and concise way of how you deal with things and you're on the same page. Did you come up with your plan per se, before you started having children? Did it feel?
This is a good question.
And how did you get to that place of being on in agreement on how you would handle your parenting and your plans?
Yeah. Do you want to jump in?
So,
first?
like I
I
said,
think we both have different answers to this.
like I said in the beginning, I was so scared to have kids. I do not know what I'm doing. I won't know what I'm doing. I don't think I was paying attention when I was growing up about what they did, so, my goodness, no. Or yeah, so it was definitely been a journey. And I think some of the heart healing and being aware of my own stuff and past struggles has been so helpful. So as much as I can pursue my own healing, I'm able to give more to my kids and be more present with them. As much as I can have grace on myself, I can have grace for my husband, I can have grace for my kids. And then it's been a really hard journey in walking these things out because I do so much want to rescue and protect them and yeah, all of that. So, so then when I realize, when I am operating in that way, maybe different, it's interesting because, when I start operating more like that, protect, rescue, oh, I don't want them to have to deal with consequences, then he comes in almost overly, boom, boom, rah, rah, kind of thing. And so then it's way off balance where then I'm you're a monster, and, and it feels that way, this, but when we can kind of come together and we're not stubborn against each other, like understanding the value that you bring and the value that I bring as a mom and the value that he brings as a dad, and like the different sides, it just seems like there's more balance when we can get to that point. And I can start to see like my kids are like being awful. They're not listening. They are not responding to me. They are not helping out. They're not even being aware of the millionth time I've picked this thing up, and I just keep doing it. And so it does, like, obviously, like when I see like us working together, like these things being implemented, it's like, okay, like this is how I want my kids to behave. Like, and there can be times where I feel like, oh, like it's really only affecting me. Like, oh, well, like I can clean this up, or I can redo this, or have to deal with this. But really, like we are, like if I can realize that like what I'm establishing in my home and what we're establishing is going to influence their future spouses and their children, and realizing like, okay, like I want my kids really to help out around the house and have an awareness that like we're all responsible to make this happen, to make this home function well, and not just one person being responsible for everything, or if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
having that bigger awareness of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, for like on my side, like I think I started doing like seriously like enjoying parenting conversations when I was probably like 18, 19. It was just because I was in school of ministry and Danny Silk was like speaking there regularly. And it, for me at that age, what it did was it started highlighting places where my parents were awesome. They did really good. They did really well with what they had and what they knew and where they were at, and like processing stuff along the years. And sort of like I was in school ministry, I was in this zone of like growing and it, like, oh my gosh, kingdom, like just a different perspective, like all these different like zones. And then I'm hearing sort of like random, like Danny would come in and teach on relationship and then incorporate like little like parenting stuff, kind of keep your love on sort of zones, which was coming out of Love and Logic stuff. And like, you know, and there's like this stuff that was being shared, and it was like, oh my gosh, there's a different way of doing it. And so there was like some of those sort of things at that point that I was grabbing hold of. And when like over the years, and then during when I was single is when I like worked in a group home, and so I would use some of that stuff, and so it started to work really well, and I saw like immediate change with the kids that I was working with versus other staff members. So then I like actually went and like did one of his classes, and like I went and like, you know what I mean, like I was like, all right, I want to get better at this, like I want to do a good job with my kids, like I want to raise them with like this perspective. And it was like there was definitely motivation there earlier. And then we get married and started living life. And then it was like when we got Tristan, we actually, I don't remember where we found the audiobook. If you just found it or if someone told us about it, is when like right after we got Tristan, we went back and like went and got that audiobook of like Parenting with Love and Logic for the early years. And that really saved us a lot of headaches. That put us on the right trajectory where we had been having conversations that we were disagreeing with methods and perspectives around parenting and perspectives around boundaries, consequences, rescuing, not rescuing, freedom to like climb on a jungle gym at a young age and falling and getting hurt. Like some of those sort of like conversations that we were like in disagreement about, that book actually like really helped us sort of like come back to like, oh, okay, like there's like a good place here. And then honestly, like over the years, like not to be silly, but the consequences did a lot of teaching in our life. To be really frank, like I would do stuff with the kids, like if in this scenario with like maybe rescuing or something where it's like I'm doing something with the kids and like they're like I don't have a problem with bedtime, and like she would like I'd be gone one night and she's like the kids were terrible, it was so hard, like they weren't listening, and I'm like, well, what happened? What time did you? And I'd start asking questions like, oh, well, you're not doing anything consistently that we've already established, or that like where was the consequences? Like you just let them do that? And she's like, well, I felt bad, they were really tired, and I'm like, great, they are behaving in the world that you have created for them. Like they are performing to the world that you have created. This is what's going on. Does that make sense? And it's like, it was really like, it was a bummer, like in some of those. And now vice versa, real quick, I'll go to you in just a second. Vice versa, there's been areas that have been just as strongly in the opposite, where I'm having problems with a couple of the kids, and she's like, like, you see what you're doing here, right? Like, you're creating that. And it's like, oh God, like, no, you know, like, so, I mean, that conversation has gone both ways, yeah.
Can you expand on that scenario in the context? So the way you just described it, I hear some of like emotional struggle / emotional growth personally.
Yeah.
And I get that piece, but also just the piece of exhaustion and like I feel like you've been burning the candle at both ends for so long.
Yeah.
That a lot of these tools are in the box, but they just don't know, you know.
Yeah. Like you don't have the bandwidth to engage in it.
See it through because you're just burned out and exhausted.
Totally.
Or the consistency is the big one.
Yeah.
I know what to do.
I'm so burned
Or
out,
I
I don't.
didn't do it, or I fell on my face because I'm exhausted. Or,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like it's a really good place to recognize when you're there. And the conversation probably should be like, why are we burnt out? Just to be honest, like if you don't have the capacity to do the tasks in front of you, like you need to ask the question, like, how can we make some adjustments so that we're not just burnt out all the time? And sometimes it may be like, well, like I own a business or I'm doing this thing. It's like, okay, well, let's maybe make some adjustments in some areas to where this is less there. The more that we've been on the same page, like the more that we've been engaged in parenting stuff together, the less burnout feelings there is. Typically when we've experienced burnout is when one of us is primarily doing most of that stuff. Like there's less partnership. Even if it's like some nights I'm doing all of the bedtime and some nights she's doing all the bedtime or like whatever. Even if it's like balance in that realm, when we're doing it together, it's a different flow. So like the more engaged I can be and the more aware of that I can be, if I've been gone a lot in the evenings or whatever, there's like that presence of both parents can really make a huge difference. And if you're a single parent, like it does make a difference, but it's not impossible, and God really can step in with like supernatural grace in those moments for reals. But not to be like frank, but like the burnout is like a legit deal. If you are too exhausted to like use a healthy tool, then like, you know, kind of look at that. Sometimes it's also because it feels like it's too much work, and this is where we sort of hold that intention of like, maybe my capacity needs to be stretched a little bit. Maybe I'm under believing what I can actually handle. Maybe my mindset has taught me that I should feel burnout right now, and I don't have enough energy to use this healthy tool. And it takes time to retrain that perspective a little bit. Like I'm too tired to cook a healthy meal, so I'm just going to have junk food. When in reality, the consequences of that far outweigh the time it would take to just cook a healthy meal. And so it's like actually sort of like coming back to that place of like, you know what? I'm not going to give myself an excuse to use an unhealthy tool anymore. Doesn't matter how tired I am. Doesn't matter how exhausted I am. Doesn't matter how disengaged. I'm going to try to set a standard in my life or a boundary that says these tools no longer get to be used. And no matter how tired I am, if I've got to call help in, if I've got to like, you know what I mean, like lean on each other in those zones, like we are going to like really fight to stop giving ourselves an out for an unhealthy tool, if that makes sense. And that is that conversation that you have to just sort of hold in tension.
Yeah, and I think with that is kind of once you really together establish, like maybe, I don't know, a date night or something like that, but like establish like values and goals that you're wanting, it is okay to expect that it's going to be like maybe burnout for the first week, few weeks, month, or whatever, and just like, okay, like we are really putting it all in to establish what we're wanting to create in our home, and to expect that it's not going to be easy for a while, like to retrain habits is going to take some time and some work, but then it does get easier, and the flow and then when, you know, one kid gets it, like it seems to trickle to some degree, and some of that exhaustion comes from repeating yourself a million times and dealing with the same issue over and over again, but not just one kid, now times 4 or 5 or however many, you know, so it can feel super exhausting. And I think too, just like having times where you can like step into, I don't know, like a moment with the Lord, or like more encounters with him, and realizing like, okay, you've given me these children, like it was never, because there's some things like you just can't cut out. Like I can't cut a child out of the equation because of the way things are right now in the world. Like I can't cut out homeschool as much as I'd like to, you know? No, I'm kidding. Oh, Jesus. Okay, but this is brand new, and so for this year, maybe even next year, I think it's going to be exhausting probably until I get a flow or figure out how to do this. But to some degree, it's like, okay, God, like this is what you've put before us. This is where we live right now. This is the way the world is right now. These are the values that we have. So somehow you're going to give me what I need because you promised to do that. You've given me everything I need. You've made me victorious. You've given me these children. So I am looking, I'm expecting for him to make a way instead of like, there's no way, like I'm exhausted, I'm this, like how can I function? Like how can I do this? How can I do that? I'm gonna start looking and shifting my attention to the belief and the understanding that I have what it takes. The Lord has given me tools for each child. He's gonna speak to me in the way that they're gonna be able to hear me. Do you know what I mean? Like, and be able to I don't know, just expect that there's going to be the energy, expect that there's going to be the capacity because he's super faithful and he wants good things for our kids. He wants good things for our families. And I think he's just like waiting to partner with us in deeper ways in these areas. So,
Yeah.
I wonder if you guys had any insight or resources for a kid that's grieving, like a small child. I have a 3.5-year-old, and this last year has been a really intense year of loss for him.
Yeah.
It started with our dog, our family dog bit him in the face. We had to put our dog down. And we had close family member pass, and then my wife was pregnant, and he's already planning how to teach his little sister things.
Man.
She had a miscarriage, and so he's really, I didn't know how all that was affecting him until this last week. We buried our father, and at that funeral, I mean, I just could see how intense that was for him.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how to handle it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be really honest, is like these are the sort of moments that like are probably some of the most challenging as a parent because it's not anything you can fix. It's, you know, there's not like you can't bring back your dog, the daughter. You know what I mean? It's like these things are like, so, you know, there's a side of me where I'm just like, dude, I just want to sit and give you a hug and hug your kid and like, you know, you just like cry, like, you know, it's like, but that's actually what's really healthy in grieving, right? Is actually that moment where you get to sit and just grieve together and teach him that it's okay to grieve. There's like this component of moving on that's there, but like it's on the other door. It says that Jesus promises to comfort all who mourn. You want to experience the comfort of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, it requires that you mourn. You know, and so there's this process of oftentimes with our kids, we see that the pain that they're in, we see like the turmoil, and not in a lighthearted way, but like we want to step in and rescue and fix it. Like, you know, like we want to be in that zone and say like, man, like it'll be okay. You're going to do this. You're going to see she's in a better place. Like all of the phrases that we want to use to try to make them feel better, when in reality, what they need someone to sit with them in that place. And so I think that like most, just from experience and research and stuff, most of the sort of behavioral problems and life problems from like grieving is coming from usually people that have like squelched it and suppressed it and not really dealt with it or walked through it. Does that make sense? And so like just, okay, embracing this process of like, hey buddy, you sad? Yeah, I'm sad. What's going on, you know? And
on our part,
yeah.
He'll tell the world that his dog's in heaven, his
Yeah.
sister's in heaven. And I think we moved on so quickly, you know, with our dog.
Yeah. Where it's like, and you probably like, I think this may be what you're hinting at is like at the funeral, you're seeing stuff and it's like, oh my gosh, there's like some untapped stuff there, because the way that we deal with emotions in our heart is a bit like layers, kind of peeling back layers. There's going to be moments where you think everything's okay, something's going to peel back a layer for him, and fresh stuff is going to come out, and just being there with him in that place. And then like, you know, yeah, like out of that sadness, okay, like, you know, I remember this is like very much a lighthearted situation. Does that make sense compared to what you're saying? It's like this part that I'm communicating is difficult for me because I want to fix it. I want to just like move on and like take care of stuff. My daughter, this was like a year and a half ago, was upstairs and she came downstairs. This was when we were still in California and was, I mean, a mess, like just like wailing, crying mess, and trying to figure out what's going on. And it wasn't even that big of a deal. The boys were being mean to her and took one of her toys, or it was like a classic sort of thing. But I could tell emotionally she was like, "They hate me. They're so," like she was like saying like really strong stuff. And I'm like, you can't talk like that, like, you know, in that zone. And I was actually in the middle of actually sermon prepping at the table, so I was like, my capacity to deal with that stuff was like gone. Like I'm very much in work mode, trying to do slides and all this stuff. And she came in at the table on our bench. And I'm like, these are those moments where I'm just like, thank you, Holy Spirit, for like grabbing my attention, you know? She comes in and sits down and I'm like, what's going on? And I put my arm around her and she just starts, I mean, like crying. And I'm like, kind of like trying to not laugh, like it's shocking, you know? We're in that zone and she's like really crying. I'm like, what's going on? Well, they're just whatever, she's saying stuff. And I'm like, man, that sounds really, really hard. And she's like, it is hard. She kind of cries for a little bit longer, and I'm like, oh. She kind of stops, and I didn't say anything. I literally just held her while she was crying, and I'm just kind of like, after a few minutes, and I'm like, okay. And she's like, all right. She kind of stops, and she kind of lifts up, and she's like, okay. I'm like, oh, do you need me? Do you need my help with anything, or do you want me to come upstairs with you? No, I'm okay. Gets up, smiles, and walks away and goes around and like goes back up and keeps playing with her brothers, like as if it's all good now, you know? And I just remember like this thing like clicks me like, man, how many times do we just need to cry and let it out and know that we're okay in that place? Like know that we're loved, know that like we're safe, know that like our emotions, like our parents are not insecure about our emotions. God's not insecure about me venting or like having struggles in my life, that God can just sit with me. Like I'll cry for a little while and then, I just needed to get that out. You know, and it's like, it's okay. I think the situation's okay. Nothing's fixed, but, you know, and I think that like grieving is like similar in that process of like, you're going to find those moments, you know, it's going to peel back and like pay attention, you know, like, all right, bud, come here. Like it's hard. It's like, there's no answers. That's like literally the answer is to just know that you're loved in the midst of that. Know that you're safe and secure in the midst of that. You know, and then obviously he may have questions and things, and then just navigating that.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely dealt with death a lot with animals, and it's really hard. You know, but I think one of our hardest times was actually over a lizard. Yeah, a lizard. Or Tristan, like, he just loved this lizard so much, and it got left outside for too long.
And he cooked. Yeah, it was bad.
And he was just devastated. So we buried it and had a little funeral for it. And then, like, for the next few days, like, he was just, like, so sad and, like, he was like, I just don't want to get up. Like, I don't want to do anything. And then at one point he wanted to go dig it back up out of the ground. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, what is happening over this lizard? And you know, and so it's like, okay, so
Well, it's
obviously.
even like a good lizard. It's like a lizard we caught outside somewhere, you know, just like,
Yeah,
like yellow
but it was,
bellied,
he would
like,
hold
you know,
it
whatever,
and
like
talk to
blue-bellied
it, and it's
lizard.
like his little friend, you know. And so it was like really so crazy to see like my kid's like actually showing signs of depression right now, you know, like from what he is, the behaviors that he's exhibiting. And so obviously on our part, not to minimize, it's just a lizard. You know what I mean? Or of course not. It's like means so much more than that to him. So realizing like this really matters to you. This is really sad. Giving that time, like you're saying, to grieve. And then honestly, I always invite the Holy Spirit in to the situation. Invite Jesus in. I don't know how familiar your kids are with the idea of Jesus, but sometimes I'll just be like, I want you just to like feel what you're feeling, and I want you to like invite Jesus into the room. Like use your imagination, use the eyes of your heart to see him here with you. And then even making that exchange of like, okay, I'm not meant to carry all this grief on my own. I'm not meant to carry the fear of death, all the questions and the burdens and all of these things on my own, but I have Jesus here to help carry every burden. And maybe I don't have the answers and we don't have the answers, but he does. And so we can trust him with that. And so I even like imagine, like, because a lot of times really most of the time we carry our emotions in our body in a physical way. So you can even like, when you're talking about sadness or grief, like usually you can actually feel it like in the pit of your stomach or something like in your chest or wherever you carry your grief or your emotion or whatever it is. And so then being aware and present in that moment of what you're feeling, it makes it easier to like, okay, like, God, I just give that to you. Like, I hand that over to you, and Jesus, I let you hold on to it. Another thing I've done with kids that maybe aren't super familiar, like they really see Jesus as like, in the white robe and, or like maybe they don't really understand like, oh, Jesus is my friend. Like he's right here with me all the time. So sometimes I'll even say like, I want you to imagine what would perfect love look like if it walked into the room and it was right next to you. Perfect, beautiful love. And it's right here all around us, like holding us and within us. And then, like, what would that look like? Handing those bricks, that slime, that fog, or whatever, because usually it looks like something. Kids are really visual, so it usually looks like this weight or this heaviness or this grief or whatever it is. What would it look like to just let perfect love hold that for you and have that, and then now my heart is open to receive, okay, Jesus, what do you have from my heart instead of the fear, the sadness, whatever it is, and he always has a gift in exchange for those things. So
Yeah, that's really good. You gotta, yeah.
We got 13 questions.
I believe it, actually.
8 of them I'll try to summarize.
Okay. Yeah. That's actually like a legit, like a really good, like actually like that it's really actually not that uncommon in the context of like age as well as like struggles in that zone. Are you guys shaking your head like like? Yeah, that's what I mean. I could tell you were like, yeah. It's like this, and this is like actually like it's one of those situations where for me like my first go-to, like in like just hearing that progression, was from the very beginning. Like so, like hey, go put the cup in the sink. Pretty normal request, right? Like you would expect it. It's like not a big deal. Like that immediate like response is like a problem. Like you should hear that as like, okay, one of two things. One, like there's stuff going on in his world that he's not processed and dealing with, and it's like this is the vent. This is the valve that it's all coming out. And most of the time when people have like really strong outbursts, obviously it has nothing to do with the cup. There's like other stuff in his world that's like going on. The second thing is like from that very beginning, they're like honestly like if you're like, especially even like using choices and consequences and stuff, that very first thing, there would have been no more discussions. That was consequences there. The fact that like there isn't consequences for like an immediate disrespectful outburst is giving permission to like a zone of going back and forth where like, yeah, you're totally in control. Like you're not freaking out against him, right? There's like no fight. It's almost shocking where you're like, where is this coming from? It's like, at that point, there has to be like a spot of like, that's a bummer, and like, if it is a common sort of thing, having a conversation beforehand and like game plan, okay, what can we set up that would enforce, like have healthy consequences that reinforce that like this is like unacceptable or like not behavior that we're going to allow in our home or a way of communicating. So like when that line gets crossed, it's like that's consequences, and then that's when I pull in this this page right here, these phrases. Where is it at? The I know, probably so, maybe so, that could be I don't know, nice try. Like you don't even have a conversation. There's zero conversation. If everything's escalated at that point, you are like any conversation you have will not be logical. Things will be said that aren't meant. Attitudes will be displayed that probably are not their value or your heart. Like you can't have a discussion. And in that zone, like that's where it's like, maybe so, room time, like gotta get a room. Like, oh, you're the worst parent in the world. Maybe. I don't think so. You just like, if you have a couple, like, you just use a couple of these phrases of like, I don't know, like, where you can like just not engage in that discussion. And it's like, because the consequences are still there. So if you've established what those consequences are, all you're having to do is like enforce those consequences in that place where you're not engaging in the emotional battle. And that would take some strategy on your guys' part in terms of like, okay, so this is like a constant thing that's happening. What could we establish? Like, what can be the communication of like the good consequences and the bad consequences? And then sort of like that line just got crossed, and it's like, okay, like this is, unfortunately, like this is this is what happens. Now, what's crazy is that like our examples right now, a lot of it is from when our kids were younger. These actual phrases, I've heard more examples with teenagers than I have with younger kids, because of that actual like escalation where you have a teenager that is like coming, like there's this one even the zone, like Danny Silk has this crazy story where he got invited to the public high school to start teaching like parenting stuff. And like a single parent that was there, it was like, goes home and she's like, all right, I'm going to try this. And she told her daughter, and he was like, tell your daughter you're going to do something different. Like, tell them, like, you know what I mean? Like, hit the reset button, apologize for like not giving consequences early enough that you know what I mean? Like, it's like actually like taking responsibility for that. Like, hey buddy, I'm like outside of that fight, like where it's like, all right, so here's the thing. These behaviors, like, aren't good. You probably don't want to speak that way. I know I don't want to be treated that way. I don't treat people that way. But we have sort of allowed this conversation to happen because there hasn't been consequences in this zone. We're really sorry. Will you please forgive us? Great. Forgiveness restores the standard. So it's like, okay, moving forward, it's okay. If you want to ask a question, you want to have a discussion, if you want to voice some things, we are here for that, 100%. But if you choose to engage in this way, this is what that's going to look like. You know what I mean? Like actually sort of like having a bit of a reset, especially if there's been sort of a pattern of that. But it's crazy. She goes home and like right away starts like her teenager comes in and it's like, it was like about a phone situation. And she's like, I'm really sorry. Like kids that know how to speak respectfully to their parents get to have their cell phones. What? You are just and she like, cussing her mom out, the whole deal. And it's like, probably so. Maybe, like, what do you mean maybe? What do you mean you're maybe the worst mom in the world? Like, could be. It's just like, oh, I can't get anywhere with you. It's like, maybe so. Like, and it like literally like just stayed right there. Her teenager goes away. She of course like breaks down, starts crying in the kitchen, and it's like, it's hard. It's really hard to go through that zone. And it was like the cool testament was like over the couple weeks that they did the classes and stuff, like all the results like already of just like staying consistent on it, where a teenager comes back and is like, hey, I'm really sorry I said that mean thing to you. You know what I mean? Or like, it's like, it's okay. Like you still don't get to use your cell phone, like until whatever. It's like, there's still consequences there. I totally forgive you. We're there with it. And it's like, I'm helping you learn how to control that. If in this situation, right, or even like where you guys are at, if there's like that sort of outburst, like shifting that perspective of like, I'm secure enough to handle your disrespect. It doesn't mean I give permission to it, but I don't have to react or respond to it. I'm here to help you learn how to manage this part of your life that is out of control. So how can we do that together? Like, this is not me versus you. This is not you disrespecting me, and now I need to punish you or discipline you, or even use like a good discipline, you know what I mean, like healthy consequences for that disrespect. There's a bigger issue here. You need to learn how to manage this, and you're managing this in a really unhealthy way. Disrespect, name calling, whatever, all those different things are. And so then now you're in there with them to walk through that.
So to follow up with that, in your opinion,
Okay.
what's a natural consequence when they yell, mom, or be disrespectful, yelling, hitting? What's like a natural, right? If they're hitting,
Yeah.
you hit them back.
Yeah. I keep a wooden sword. And it's like whack. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Yeah. That is a good brain in there. I love that. It's like, okay. Good natural consequence. Well, there is like, first off, so when in conversation, if someone's being disrespectful, like like if we just zoom out of like away from parenting, like in real world, like if she's being disrespectful, like in a mean way, like not in like, oh, I'm a man, you gotta respect me. Like in sort of like if she's using language that's like hurtful in our, like if we're having a conversation, like I would like we luckily don't have to necessarily do this, but like it's like, hey, when you stop name calling, I'll be here for the rest of this conversation. There's like a relational boundary of like we don't treat each other in relationship this way. And so in the context of like with a kid, there's like this zone of like you have to sort of pick which battle you're going to attack first. You know what I mean? Like what is the root? Is the issue right now that he's like being disrespectful, or was there something that like escalated to that point and sort of like you know what I mean? Like picking like what we're going to engage right now, because like real quickly, right, when you're reacting in those situations, the technical like consequences for all of these things could be adding up real fast. Like, great, now you didn't put your cup in the room, now you disrespected me, now you slammed the door, now you threw a gun at me. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just like boom, 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 boom. It's just like, whoa, it just like blows up now if we're like kind of doing that. So my first plan in that zone would be like, okay, what's the first like root issue that we're going to deal with? Like just attacking that, and then the consequences like, hey, like this is not how we treat each other. I'm here for this conversation. Go to your room until you're ready to have a conversation in a way where we're not yelling at each other. Like I'll listen to you when you're not calling me names. I'm willing to listen to you while you're not screaming at me. Room time or fun time. When you're ready, I'm ready to listen, as long as we're not name calling. Does that make sense? Like you're communicating the boundaries of like, to have a conversation needs to look like not name calling and not screaming at me. But I'm here for it. I'm not going anywhere. Like I actually want to hear why, you know what I mean? Of like, and then it's like, well, you know, once the emotions de-escalate, it's really fascinating to like then actually have the conversation. And that's where it's like, I think that first like lesson of like, okay, or have you like, is there a thing where your child is perceiving like transgressions against him in a way that he really is like upset, or she really is upset about something? And like learning to hear that and be okay with like, yeah, I can see how you would feel that way. Like you're telling me not to hit, and then you're getting a spank as a consequence. I can see how that would be confusing. The problem though is if that's being thrown out as an attacking thing, you can't have that conversation, right? Where it's like you can't even like, it's like not even like you couldn't even apologize in a way that would be helpful in that situation. But if the emotions are there and that's really what they're feeling, it's like, wow, I could understand that. Maybe it wasn't the best consequence. Maybe, you know, I didn't really have any other options. Like maybe there could have been a better way to have consequences in that situation. You know, I'm sorry for the confusion I could have caused in that. Will you please forgive me? Great. It's not okay that we hit people, but there'll still be consequences. We'll work on something that works, that's more appropriate in that zone. You know, what do you need to learn? Like, you know what I mean? There's like but you can't have that conversation if everything's still escalated. So I think the first goal would then be to like learn to de-escalate that. And so the consequences could look in that zone, honestly, like totally arbitrary in the context of like, hey, boys that know how to be respectful in conversation get these privileges, like whatever privileges that, does that make sense? Like that part can be pretty arbitrary, especially in that zone where it's maybe not directly connected to something. Or maybe if you know, maybe he was younger or something, or she's younger, like if they're hitting people at their friend's house, it would be like, you know, kids that know to not hit other kids get to go to people's houses, because that's like connected to where it happened or what took place, lying, you know, that sort of thing. Like kids that know how to tell the truth get to whatever the context that the lying took place in, that sort of thing. Like recognizing where there's like privileges that are taking place in their life and how it's connected to what outburst or what sort of behavior thing. Is that an okay answer? Does that answer sort of like what you're asking?
Just two more questions.
Yeah.
I'll cut those in half.
Yeah.
There's one Christian question. So I didn't grow up in the church.
That's great. Yeah.
So there's two things that come to my mind is, I don't understand the purpose of praying for meals.
Mhm.
So should we do that, and what's the purpose?
That's great.
Elevator speech on that.
Okay.
And then the second thing is, I said 2 days ago, hey, did you guys see my Bible? My daughter says, you don't read your Bible. So Rachel tells me stories of all the time, her seeing her dad read her Bible growing up.
Yeah.
You spend time with the Lord, I'm like, babe, you realize I leave the house every day before you wake up.
Yeah.
Like,
That's honestly like a really good, those are really good questions.
really Christian questions
Yeah.
that,
That's fantastic.
that's separate from like normal parenting.
Yeah. But- So it actually touches on a couple things that we've sort of talked about in here, which is actually really, really great. The question is like, Christians sort of like, should we pray for our meals? Like, is that like an actual thing? Like, whatever. And then obviously like, should your kids see you reading your Bible? Is that like an important sort of zone? The quick thing about praying for your meals, to be really honest, I'm going to say something that she does not like me to say, okay? But I love you so, so much.
Don't say it.
Praying before a meal is not scriptural in any way. It is religious jargon, just to be frank. Okay, however, this is going to cause a lot of anxiety in her because what that sounds like I'm saying is there's no value for praying before your meal. And that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're not going to hell if you don't pray for your meal. Your meal will not turn to maggots in your stomach if you don't pray for your meal. Your meal won't poison you if you don't pray for your meal before you eat it. None of those things will happen. That is nowhere in Scripture. Nowhere in Scripture is there a rule or a law that you have to pray before every time you consume food. Do you understand that? That is not scriptural in that context. However, what is scriptural is being thankful, rejoicing for what's in front of you, thanking God for his provision, for praying regularly. What is scriptural is develop and cultivating a heart of gratitude. Praying before your meal it can be an effective tool to cultivate those scriptural values. Does that make sense? And like for us in our home, we do pray before we eat. But when the kids are like, you can't eat because we didn't pray, I'm like, whoa. Technically they can. Like we're not going to develop that sort of religious sort of perspective over this and miss the whole heart of why we're doing this. We're doing this because we are practicing a discipline of making sure we're grateful for the provision that is in our life. That is why we pray before we eat. Before we just jump into consuming, we're going to recognize that God is our provider. We're super grateful, and we're cultivating that heart. That is a value, as a really good practice connected to a really good value that has gotten lost and become a religious post that isn't necessarily in the Bible in and of itself. Does that make sense? Like there are many verses of praying before eating. Like Jesus thanked the Lord for the food before he multiplied it. Do this in remembrance of me. He prays, and then but did he pray before they ate their normal meal, or did he pray just before communion? Does that make sense? Like it doesn't matter. The issue is gratefulness, gratitude, thanksgiving, blessing your food, this whole context. So that is important. Yeah.
Okay, I think you did a good job. Thank you.
Okay,
No.
good. Okay, good.
No, and I just like any opportunity, like how in any way can we incorporate the Lord, awareness of him in everything that we're doing. When you lose a toy and you're upset, let's pray and ask God where it is. Let's create an expectation and expectancy that he's part of all of it, that he cares about all of it, and 3 meals a day, that's an easy way. Without being super religious and saying the same prayer every single time, I understand how it can become just robotic, but you can okay, God, or even there's been times where because of where we're at financially, maybe we couldn't buy really good produce or food or grass-fed beef or whatever, and it's okay, God, this is what we could do, and we're doing the best we can. Thank you for providing, and just ask for your covering over this, and as if we're eating grass-fed, organic, raw, whatever. Let it turn into that in our bodies, and just God, you know where we're at. We have faith that you're going to take care of us.
Yeah.
And
that is it. That's what you're cultivating. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So as well as when you have, we didn't get into it. I don't have it in this notes, but there's a really good book called The Boy Crisis. It's not by a Christian author, but honestly, if you have boys or you are related to anyone that has boys, that would be everyone. You should read it. It is incredibly powerful. The guy who wrote it, Warren Farrell, was. In the 70s, was one of the primary feminists. Okay, he was on the board for a feminist organization in New York City, and he starts doing this research and starts watching the value of boys in manhood drop and disappear, and then starts seeing all these problems, starts doing research. And so this book came out of years of actually being a prominent feminist and then watching sort of like these issues cropping up with boys. And one of the things he talks about in there is the value of a weekly family dinner. This is like it's just a secular author, like what, you know what I'm saying? Like he, it's just like, it's so cool. Like he gets into it. So sometimes praying before your meal, like, so we have like regular family meal times. Like sometimes praying is sort of like nice just because it kind of like an official start of like eating our food. The second thing he said about like, should your kids see you reading the Bible in that way? This for me ties into, I would say if your question is geared around a religious pressure and legalism, my answer is no. My answer is if you think that you want to model and show behaviors that you want your children to be raised in, then my answer is yes. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, like, do I think that there's some sort of legalistic religious perspective of like, if I am not reading my Bible in front of my kids, I am sinning or I'm failing as a parent? Absolutely not. Do I think we need to be modeling the behaviors and values in front of our kids? Yes, absolutely. Now, if you have a classic situation where your kid is like, well, you don't do that. And it's like, actually, like I actually get up in the morning and leave for work at 5 a.m. I read my Bible here. I'm studying here. I'm looking at the word here. Like it's a value. It's an important thing. So when I'm asking you to read your Bible is I'm sort of like bringing you into that. And yeah, it works for some people to get up early before they go to work and read for some, you know what I mean? Like these different contexts, but like just bringing them into that process of like, this is how I manage that. This is, how are you? What's a plan for you? What's something that you can do that would look like taking responsibility for spiritual growth or discipleship or, because I know you were doing like that Bible doctrines thing with them for a little while. And like, it's like just bringing them into that process of like, this is how I do it. Here are some ways that you could do it. What would you like to try? Let's try something for a little while and we'll talk about how it goes,
And I think even because now you might be reading your Bible, but it's on your phone or, you know what I mean? But so it's just the act of having your Bible out and then I'd be like, hello, help with breakfast. Don't be reading, I don't know.
I'm trying to have my quiet
reading my
time here,
Bible,
and now you're yelling at me. I'm trying to show the fact
Not
that
right now.
I'm a pastor and I read the Bible. Come on, man.
It's that just seems so not practical or but we have a value for the Word of God in our home and we want to communicate that. So what else could that look like? There's times where I have the Bible, audio Bible on in the car and we're listening to it or Bible stories or a lot of you guys have seen this now with your kids, but since Tristan was young, we would put Bible verses to songs and, nursery rhymes or whatever. And so then we're singing them all together every night at bedtime or, there's different ways to incorporate it where it's still this is a value for us without it having to what's the point of, of course, the Bible is so good that oh God, Jesus, how I feel about the Bible. I love the Bible, but it's just to have it out at this exact time when they're watching me, I don't know.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I said, well, you don't read your Bible, and I'm like, what? And Gideon goes, yeah, no, you don't. And then Rachel says, well, do I? And they both say, well, yes. And I'm like, am I even saved? In my mind, I'm like, wow, so what example am I setting for my kids?
Yeah.
So then I'm like, should they see me?
Yeah.
Should I make it, should I be, right, so relationships, we have to sometimes be intentional.
Yes.
So is it a good idea to be intentional to show them spiritual discipline of praying, of reading,
Yeah.
of worshiping, or because you do on your own, not around them,
No.
just don't, you know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to
No, that's
So, yes, absolutely, 100%, yes. You should be modeling and showing spiritual disciplines in that context. Whether or not we're going to get hung up on you specifically opening up a big leather-bound Bible and reading in front of them, no, that's it doesn't have to be that. Does that make sense? But in answer to your question, that last phrasing, the answer is yes, you should be. You need to find ways to model it to your kids because they are going to catch those things. They are going to be engaged in those things, and you don't want something especially for you guys, I know, your relationship with God being so, preeminent and important in your life and, such a core value, you don't want it to become just a passé secondary thing that your kids sort of just kind of happen to be around. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to look the same. So like Savannah gave a bunch of different examples on what that could look like, but making sure, yes, finding times to model and to incorporate them into spiritual practices, spiritual formation, quiet time, whatever it happens to look like, and whatever way you want to go about it. Yes, it is absolutely important. Yeah, it's a really good question, because I realize like that's not in our notes. Focus is like a little bit different, so that's really good. All right, for the sake of time, we need to be done. I'm going to pray for you guys. Is that okay? If there's more questions, I'm going to be here. We'll be here. We got to clean up. If there's some guys that can help just carry some tables downstairs, that would be helpful, but no pressure. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm not on crutches anymore, which is just so awesome. So I'm not really stressed about it. But, we can all kind of carry some tables. But I want to pray for you guys. And I know coming out of this, our heart is that you guys would be encouraged and like actually feel like equipped, like, man, we're ready. Like we can jump into some stuff right now. Like there is actually a sense of hope around stepping back into this parenting realm and sort of engaging in a fresh way. If it has stirred up some concerns or questions beyond like what we just discussed, please reach out. Like we are not experts in the context of like, in like, I'm not asking you to ask us for help because we're experts. I'm asking you to ask for help so that you're not on your own. You are not on your own in this place of parenting. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to come up with solutions on your own. Even if at the very least we sit and pray with you. You know what I mean? And partner for breakthrough in a particular area with the Holy Spirit. Like we want to stay engaged. We really care about our families. And our families really taking on that picture and that look of the kingdom of heaven in our relationships and in our parenting. And so we're here for it. We're here with you guys in this place. Is that okay? You guys good? Awesome. Let's pray and move on. All right. Lord, thank you for what you're doing. God, thank you for just your heart in parenting. Lord, that you stepped into our life, God, and you called us your own. You adopted us as sons and daughters and made us heirs of your kingdom. Lord, that we actually carry an inheritance from you, Father. Lord, I pray right now that there would be such a glistening and bright view of hope in our parenting, in our relationships, in our family, God. Lord, in our marriages. Lord, in our relationship with our parents. Lord, I pray right now that our view, any area that is not full of hope right now, you would supernaturally inject hope and life into it in Jesus' name. Lord, I pray for healing and health, Lord. God, for grace and wisdom as parents to walk these waters, to navigate these places with our children. Lord, I pray right now for just for restoration, places and mistakes, Lord, places of brokenness, things where we've messed up, God, that there would be just an outpouring of grace in Jesus' name into those places, Lord. Lord, I thank you for that right now. Lord, I pray for just a blessing over every parent, over every family, that this rest of today and this weekend, Mother's Day, would just be so recharging and restful and full of life, God. Lord, that you would just pour back and bless every person here in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. Love you guys. You're welcome. Make sure and grab your kids.